Thank you. So welcome everybody to day 2 of the 2024 Montana Brownfields workshop. Before we kick things off today, I did, well, not me, but Jen, graciously got clarity on the whole RFP Brownfields reference from headquarters and one of the attorneys there. And you can reference Brownfields in your RFP. What you cannot do is put Brownfield experience as some of the ranking criteria that you would score a proposal against. But it's perfectly fine to say this is a Brownfields project, you know, we're doing Brownfields and have the word peppered throughout. It's not considered a keyword. So thank you again, Jen, for that clarity. There are no keywords, so that's great. Awesome.
Do you have that with your ranking? Where does it say that you can't put it in a ranking?
It says, what I got from Jerry is you can use evaluation criteria should not state that brownfield grant experience is required. First is experience addressing contaminated sites.
So the clarifying language for those online that didn't catch that is, you cannot have brownfields experience in the region, but you can have, they need to have experience dealing with contaminated sites. So, again, thank you. And again, if you have any questions as you're developing your RFP, you know, don't hesitate to reach out to KSU tab, we can help you, and then we can follow up with answers if there's something we don't know with EPA headquarters. So we're gonna keep moving on with cleanup discussions. We're gonna kick it off right off the bat this morning. We're gonna hear from Greg Davis about cleanup checklists and best practices for your cleanup projects. Then Jen Wilbur from EPA is going to tell us all we need to know about BABA. And then we will hear from our team of experienced consultants in the room about various cleanup methodologies. We'll take a small break and we will come back after that. So I'm going to quit talking and pass it on to Greg. And for our presenters today, if you guys stand kind of up here, that gives more room for the owl. And then we also have laser pointers and a clicker to have available. That picture makes easy. Will you make this one? Oh, yes. And another shout out to all of our sponsors for today. Yesterday and today, again, we have for in person, we have the coffee, we have the bagels, we had some light snacks yesterday, and we did do that without our sponsors. So I'm going to list these. Thank you. Okay. Take it away, Rick.
All right, thank you.
Would you like to?
All right, this is going to be like stunning material, but it's important. It's for all of our cleanups. And I'm just kind of going to go through all the cleanup requirements. I know we've been really not great about enforcing all the cleanup requirements that are applicable to all the grants, especially when it comes to like RLF loans, RLF subgrants, state and tribal cleanups. Prior to Bill, we didn't really have state and tribal cleanups that much. You know, maybe we had like one a year, so it was kind of a one-off thing. Now we have state of Montana doing 18 cleanups a year or something like that with their state funds. So I thought it would be a good time to do this. So I'll just get right into it. Couple
There, I'll stage of it.
All right. Well,
Thank you.
some things that are really important is plan ahead and use a checklist. So the checklist that we have is the RLF checklist. I know it's going to really be applying to cleanup grants. If you have a cleanup grant, it's directly in the terms and conditions, but it's all this kind of same stuff. But if you work with your project officer, I think it's good to have a checklist. I know like it's been really good with like, CSKT has done a ton of cleanups. I know Willie and I, he created a checklist just for each of the projects, you know, essentially a Excel spreadsheet with each of the requirements for each of the projects. I highly recommend that. You can work with your project officer and like have it tailored, if you're doing multiple cleanups. But yeah, use a checklist. This is our RLF checklist. I'll provide this as well in the documents in case you have. So a lot of stuff here. So I'm gonna go through the 13 requirements. If you have like an RLF grant, it costs a lot of money. It's probably equal to the cost of cleanup, the compliance with all this. Unfortunate, but if you do have an RLF grant, one thing I do recommend is if you're doing loans for projects, that every single one of these things that either you or your contractor is doing, all of those get applied as loan applicable costs. And I can kind of walk you through that. Thanks, Tanya, for that idea, because that is like saving the RLF program, because meeting that 50% loan requirement is really tough. So site eligibility, I've just put, this is probably a good reference presentation, you know, maybe not so great for following along and being entertained, but if you look back at it, it's pretty easy. It just goes through the requirements, who's responsible for what, the grantee or EPA. So I'll just kind of go through these quickly. So site eligibility, we have a site eligibility form for every project. If you have a cleanup grant, you've already done this through the threshold review process, so you don't need a site eligibility form. Petroleum sites need a state petroleum eligibility determination, unless you're in Indian country, then that comes from EPA. The administrative record, it's the grantee, or as the contractor, your client's responsibility to keep the administrative record. We do have audits. There will be more audits on infrastructure law grants. So just kind of be ready, and you know the general rule of thumb is CYA. So if you have anything that's, say, like a building demolition or something like that, that's like, ooh, does this really meet the requirements? That's where you kind of want the memo from project officer saying, hey, this meets the requirements because of X, Y, Z. You know, we couldn't leave a hazard, therefore this was determined to be an eligible cost. PDF that memo, keep it in your file. I've had audits already where that was questioned, and the auditor and the IG looked at that memo and said, excellent, thank you, and just went on. So it has worked. That was Northern Cheyenne Tribe. Historic preservation, plans time. It takes, there's unknowns with historic preservation. I think we are doing it now for every abatement project. So we weren't doing it for every abatement project. We kind of got from our historic preservation specialist, they took a look at our records and said, you are not doing this correctly. You have to do every abatement. So plan for it, plan ahead for it. You will need 2 fees that come with that, and may need a contractor. So they had a list of historic architectures, there's a list of historic architectural specialists on the Montana E106 website. I would, if you have an RLF grant, if you have a cleanup grant, I would get on that list and get somebody on retainer, just so that they can fill out what is called what was the second form? The site. I don't know. I'm missing. They have a second form which is needed, which is the Smithsonian number. If you may need to apply for Smithsonian number, and to do that, it has to come from somebody with a historic architecture background. So I would prepare for that. Yes, Jason.
For both, if you have an RLF, is it loans and subgrants, or just subgrants, or?
It's for any. Yeah, it doesn't matter. It's any cleanup.
Will you repeat the question?
Oh, is it just for RLF loans or RLF sub-grants? And it's for any type of cleanup, anytime you do a cleanup. So if you're in Indian country, this is done through a different process because it's a sovereign nation. So it's not done through our historic preservation process. And there's also a fee, I believe it's $35 for a site lookup or file search. So that fee can come from your grant funds. So just kind of be prepared for that. Endangered species, this is something that EPA does. Something I should probably do more earlier in my projects, but we've never had an impact. So I would say where it would come up is if you're doing the most significant, if you're doing, say, like something like Harlowton, like a dig and haul. We didn't have anything there, but if you're doing a dig and haul and it's next to a wetland or something, that's probably the most likely area. Historic buildings, I've never seen anything because you're within the building envelope, but something the EPA does, just if you're next to a wetlands or something and doing a dig and haul, there may be some other minor requirements. Community involvement plan, we talked about this before. It's reasonable notice to the community. I'd say for cleanups, make it simple, and short. There's no like specific length. There's no specific requirements for where you put the public notice, what the public notice says, just reasonable notice and ability to comment, and then including any comments in the administrative record, which can be a little tough because you may not think that way. You may just respond to somebody in public. So you got to kind of make a record of it, PDF and put in your file. The project match is, this is something that's for infrastructure grants not required. So if you have a non-infrastructure funded cleanup, then you would have to make a project match. There's a ton of things you can use as a project match, as long as it's not a federal fund. Like you can use the DNRC cleanup funds. That's what we did. For headwaters, we used just for their very first cleanup, they did a $200,000 cleanup and then got a $200,000 match from the DNRC cleanup grant that was used. So that covered the entire match for the $1 million grant. So you can do it one match for the entire grant, or you can separate it. If you're going to be using employee time, which is not paid for by the grant as a match, make sure you just have a way to track that early on. Because I know we've gone back in time and tried to recreate that, and it's real pain. It's just easier if you have that employee time, some mechanism. I know some people have worked it into their actual time card system, but tracking employee time early on is a real benefit if you're going to be using this match. The APCA, it's written in the terms and conditions. If you have a state and tribal grant, the APCA requirements are really minimized. It's just write an APCA that is consistent with the scale of the project, basically. So for a state and tribal grant, those are really minimized quite a bit, and they don't have the same requirements. But the APCA requirements that are in the terms and conditions. The big new addition is the climate change reporting. There's a 2-page guidance on the EPA Brownfields website about how to fill that out. But I think once you do it once, you've done it for all of your projects. You kind of have a template to work with. It does say something about sea level rise. It's not really applicable to 99% of our projects. Unless you're talking like geologic timeframes. But if I had a recommendation and you were looking for something that was a really good climate change, I think if you want to go into anti-idling or diesel emissions, if you really want to take it to kind of the next level and you're in like a highly dense area, then maybe think about like anti-idling or tier 0 diesel engines or something like that, or minimizing the number of trips to the landfill via this process. You know, I think those are for Montana, that probably is what makes the most sense to me, given this guidance, but it's out there, it's a requirement. But yes, keep it simple. I'm not a fan of fancy reports and big, glossy reports because, let's spend the money on cleanups. The cleanup plan is something a lot of you probably haven't done on a lot of projects. We've also accepted the bid solicitation as the cleanup plan. And if you're gonna do that, then just title bid solicitation, you know, bid solicitation cleanup plan, you know, be really obvious for somebody looking at it. Because a cleanup plan is just, what are we gonna do? It could be very simple. It could be, you know, it's kind of nice to have on some projects because it's like, oh, this is gonna fund the roof replacement. It's gonna fund, we're gonna do it in XYZ order. This is gonna be subcontracted. This is not gonna be subcontracted. Subcontracted. Sometimes it's just nice to have like a 1-page. This is what we're gonna do. Different regions will have different expectations of a cleanup plan. Some will be a lot more formal, and they'll be like, we need a formal cleanup plan document. That's not part of the terms and conditions. We don't require that. But, you know, a 1-pager that says, here's the process is pretty nice to have. It just is a really clarifying thing. But you can also use that bid specification because the bid specification has basically everything in it that a cleanup plan would.
But, great, so it's not required, is what you're saying?
It is a requirement. The cleanup plan is a requirement. It's just that the bid spec could meet that requirement. I think you get a little bit of different expectations from different project officers, I'll be honest, because that is really vague in the terms and conditions. It doesn't say what a cleanup plan is to be required. It actually doesn't say it's required, but then it's referenced in like administrative, what you need to put in your administrative records, put in the cleanup plan, put in so it's really pretty vague on what is required and how. So that's why I kind of not giving a super clear guidance on that. But for loan sub-grant agreements, there's RLFers. All I can say is, you know, the EPA will review the loan documents. When I review the loan documents, I'm just looking at collateral. Is this realistic? But make sure you're ahead of the game on the 50% loan requirement. That is, I'm sure you're all aware, you RLFers, that meeting that 50% loan requirement is brutal. So get ahead of the game. Don't fall victim to communities asking for sub-grants right off the bat. Procurement, you heard about procurement a little bit before, but we have that 1-pager document, 3 thresholds. The micro purchase under 10,000, small purchase 10 to 250,000, and then the simplified acquisition threshold in excess of the simplified acquisition threshold of 250,000. Just the 3 thresholds there. But we can assist with solicitations at EPA. But look at the guidance. I think most of you have seen it. If not, send me an email or I can put it on the website. It's just the 1-pager of the 3 thresholds. All right, Davis-Bacon, I'm gonna speed it up here. I see the time. Davis-Bacon, put the Davis-Bacon in QEP contracts. That's, you know, that's the easiest way. Similar to all the federal requirements, you know, BABA, Davis-Bacon. I know we talked about yesterday, we were saying, does the BABA go to the contractor? But I'm assuming probably the BABA requirement will probably go to the QEP to manage for the contractor, but that could differ in different situations.
If the Montana prevailing wage rates are higher than the federal wage rate, Do we go with Montana?
Yes, yeah.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, if the prevailing wage rate is lower than what you were gonna pay, either through Montana, prevailing wages, do you have to pay the Davis-Bacon wage? No, you have to pay the higher wage. You just have to meet the minimum Davis-Bacon wage. Bob, I'm gonna skip this. Jennifer's gonna tell us all about it. Cleanup completion report, super simple. The requirements are not significant. What I like to see is, they're in the terms and conditions, but you'll see if it's a cleanup grant, it's much more specified. It's an RL grant, there's almost nothing. State and tribal grant, there is nothing, but it just says you need a complete cleanup completion report. I like to see the waste manifests, some pictures, and a general description of what was done. So that's what I'm looking for. And then acres, last thing, acres can be done by a contractor, can be done by you, but just don't do it until the cleanup's done. Because we'll just keep on kicking it back to you every 90 days, and it will make really awkward, for awkward database reporting. So wait until it's done, cleanup assessments, wait till it's done, and then. And that's all I have. Any questions? Yes?
Verification, where you said you use your DNRC grant for your project match. Your employee hours are absolutely reimbursable by the NRC grant as long as you're not a state or federal employee. If you're already getting paid by the state or the fed, we can't reimburse for those, but for you contractors or local governments, we can pay.
Okay, does that mean you would not be able to use a portion, you'd have to take out the wages out of that as a match? I don't know. That's a different question, but thank you. All right. Any other questions? All right, thanks. Oh, Tyler.
If you're gonna be progress towards being new congressional requirements to being match the requirements that we have for project size. Right now, I think it's $2,000. If you got to do things, I was told that's a congressional house, which, monument of that. So they're $2,000. It's in DBA.
So that, okay,
And we can't change it until legislators change that threshold.
and you're looking, okay, so you're looking for a higher threshold for when Davis-Bacon applies.
2,000. Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's fine. Increase that.
Yeah, I don't have any, you were asking about whether the Davis-Bacon threshold will raise, and I don't know. I have no idea.
Would be nice if it matched the threshold we described for 10,000 small projects.
Oh, that would be a great idea.
And what it's going to take all of us collectively, advocates to our senators, House representatives, make them.
Get ready.
How many can say your bonds?
Yeah. Swallow. One more thing. Okay, thanks. Call me, email me with any questions. I always answer 406 anytime.
Yeah.
Was okay. Oh, great. Okay, I was wondering that when I saw it, but I was like, does he still need the 200 CFR? Okay.
Jake, do you want to come?
Sure.
Ooh, I have a clip. And it works? Yes, sweet. Okay.
How do you stand on a stage there just so the camera can get checked?
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes. Yes, in the back? Okay, cool. I'm usually pretty loud. I'm also from New York, so I talk pretty fast.
Then make sure you're speaking into the mic just for the online folks.
Okay, can you hear that? Perfect.
Okay, yeah. So, New Yorker who speaks very fast, I have 30 minutes to discuss a very complicated, program. So I'm hoping to make it, one, you understand what it is and if it might apply. Two, understand the basic requirements. Three, try to educate you that it is possible to work through this, so don't be afraid of it. Trying. And four, ignore the bullets, but this information changes, unfortunately, quite regularly and is probably the most frustrating thing about this right now. We also have no idea what's going to happen with an administration change, so this is what we're telling you as of today. Other thing, just a quick note, the 2 CFR 200 actually just raised the micro purchase threshold to $50,000. So if you want to read it, it's actually a good thing for you all to read. Just look it up. It's as of October 1. So if your grant is before, I don't know what they do about retroactive. I don't think it is. But your terms and conditions would be updated at that point to reflect the new amount. Okay. Bob, what is it? It is a federal law. It took a lot of us by surprise because we have never had to comply with American Iron and Steel requirements that DOT and EPA's Water Office have done. We put it into the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act or bill, depending on which one you want to call it. And it is for all federal grant programs. So I'm here on behalf of EPA. You heard about other federal grant programs yesterday. All of them. All of them. It's like DOT, HUD, FEMA, you name it. We all have to do this. Everybody across the federal government is working on this right now. So you might not have an EPA grant, or you might just have an EPA assessment grant. An assessment grant generally doesn't trigger it, but you could have CDBG funds, you could have DOT funds, you could have EPA water funds, you could have EPA air funds, you could have the EJ funds. And that's the biggest thing about the map discussion yesterday. Bob applies to those grants if you do the same work you're going to do through Brownfields. Okay, what is it? Any federal funds that do infrastructure, and I am telling you now, infrastructure is incredibly broad, must ensure that any iron, steel, manufactured products, or construction materials are produced in the United States. Now that sounds like a lot, and it is, but we're going to break it down to show you what it really means. Okay, broadly, for us, it applies to, for Olin programs, because I give this presentation to a number, it's brownfields cleanup, RLF, multi-purpose, anything that's doing construction-based activity where you're going to leave something permanently behind. That's what's triggered. If you have a Richter grant, you have a Swiffer grant for Olin, a LUS grant, or a Superfund grant for those that have the state or tribal folks here, they get Superfund, that also gets triggered depending on what you're doing. Again, infrastructure is broad. It can trigger your full project. So if you have federal and non-federal funds on a project, and I am using the term project with air quotes, that is a critical definition, and why we say work with your project officer and work with me to define what your project is. And we'll get to why, but just keep that in mind. It can trigger both pots of money or all pots of money, or just your project that our funds are funding, which is the way I'm trying to interpret things. So, anything that involves construction, alteration, maintenance, or repair of infrastructure. And infrastructure includes real property. That is where Brownfields gets triggered. Any real property includes land and buildings. Okay, and last one, purpose, time, and place. This is the test that we're using to determine the scope of a project. What is the purpose of your grant? What is the time of your grant? And then what is the place? Classic example of that is you have an RLF. You give out different loans to different entities or same entity, different purposes or different places. Those are very distinct projects. We do not lump them together. Okay, at a minimum, what is it? It's your classic stuff, roads, highways, bridges, what you would normally think of as infrastructure, but it also includes, like I said, land. And for our purposes, that includes equipment. If you have a Swiffer grant, I don't know if anybody does in here, large equipment purchases do actually trigger BABA depending on how they're being used. I won't get into that, but if you have that program, you can see me after we talk about it. Energy generation, transport, and distribution, anybody's getting any air funds, any DOE funds, that's getting triggered. They are working on a solar waiver, solar panel waiver. It was expired, they're trying to renew it. Anyway, and then anything else they feel like that fits within this that they define as infrastructure. That's where the SWIFR grants came in. We said, well, they're not doing land, they're not constructing anything. Nope, couldn't get away from that. So, if you're questioning it, ask. The project officer should be triggered for this too. What is not infrastructure? Services, labor, mainly your assessment grants are not going to trigger it. Anything along those lines that is not construction, if you will, alteration, maintenance, or repair. Temporary items removed before project completion. This can get dicey and clean up when we have pump and treat systems. We have not had to define that yet. We know that is an issue. So if you are putting a pump in and it is going to withstand the life of the project, that pump is most likely going to trigger BABA. Just going to tell you right now, it's going to be very hard for me to argue that it doesn't. And I do make these arguments quite frequently, and I do get overruled, unfortunately, more than I'd like to. Temporary items, scaffolding. So if you're doing lead abatement, you're putting up scaffolding, that doesn't count. Unfortunately, the paint that you use to do the remediation does count. Paint does trigger BABA. So if you do paint encapsulation as your remediation, the paint has to be domestically procured, yes.
Can you go back to that $50,000 threshold? That's for the whole project, not?
No, the 50,000 was a small micro purchase.
Okay, that doesn't.
Totally nothing to do with this. Nope. We're gonna get to de minimis waiver though, so. Anything that's not integral to the project. So if you're buying supplies, furniture, stuff for your office to build it out, that's not covered. Rolling stock, this is the biggest issue we are facing. We still have not settled on this. Originally, we were saying that if it was not affixed, permanently affixed to the land, BABA did not cover it. OMB came back and said, no, that is not accurate. You are interpreting that incorrectly. FEMA still says this, by the way. We have been told we can't. So what I am telling you right now, if you are buying, for example, a pickup truck that will be multi-purpose, multi-use, not tied to any one project, we are going to say BABA is not triggered. It is not integral to a project. However, let me compare that if you have a SWIFR grant, and this is happening. For those that don't know, that's the solid waste infrastructure recycling for recycling. Some of our grantees are buying sanitation trucks. They are only for picking up waste. That is the project. That is integral to the project. That is rolling stock. That is triggering BABA. So depending on how and what you're doing with your, I've got questions about I'm buying an ATV. Okay, what are you doing with the ATV? Is the ATV only staying at a solid waste facility, or is the ATV using to go out to, go explore different sites? If it's going to random things and doing whatever, we're going to argue it's not integral to any one project. It's not subject to BABA. So does that make sense? That's kind of the line. I can't ever give one definitive answer without the fact pattern, but that's roughly where we're headed. And then equipment that is integral. I'm going to give you another example. The only waiver we have issued so far, Gun Lake Tribe in Michigan. Again, this is Brownfields, this is SWIFR, wanted to buy an aerobic digester. That thing is not technically affixed to the ground, but it is literally the heart of the project. If they're taking all their waste from their casino, they're putting into the digester. Digester is not made here. One they want, the kind they want. We went through the waiver process, and I'll explain that. We did get a waiver for them, so they are able to buy an internationally made product, and they're moving forward with that. But that was determined to be integral. That is the heart of their project. That piece of equipment was integral to the project. It is subject to BABA. All right, likely to trigger, already went through this. Your state and tribal grants, same thing. Just for way of background, I actually started in Brownfields in 1998, pre-Brownfields amendments, did RLF, ran the state and tribal program. So when I do this, I am doing all of this with the guidepost of if I'm a grantee, how do I protect the grantee? What does the grantee need? Just so you know, that is my perspective. It does aggravate some people. when we're dealing with OMB, but I will always take that perspective and try to work for you guys to figure out how to make this the most effective. So, there's a lot of fighting that goes on, or not fighting, literal, but discussion, robust discussion about interpretation. And I will continue to do that. Our project officers will work with you, work with me to do that regardless of your program, regardless of the permit. What is not typically triggering? Job training, assessment, or has waste, loss, Superfund core, Superfund site specific does, or can, Superfund site assessment grants are not likely to trigger. That's what we're saying. It's currently what we're sticking with. Can't say 100% certainty that will stay that way, but that's what we're looking at. Brownfields likely projects. These are pretty straightforward. If you are remediating a building, and it is a publicly owned or nonprofit owned for public use, you're doing asbestos and lead abatement is the biggest one we see. If you are going to remove the asbestos and then say, put the ceiling back, you put that ceiling back, that ceiling is now triggering BABA. The removal of the asbestos does not, because you are not doing anything that is leaving something behind. If you repair the building, say you're doing lead abatement and you're taking the windows out, or PCB caulk, you're taking the windows out, you're putting new windows back in, the new windows going back in is going to trigger. If it is the reason, if the remediation is the reason you are putting the windows back in or putting the ceiling back in. Distinction. You're doing a lead abatement, lead and asbestos abatement, you're pulling the windows out, you're pulling the ceiling down, you're also doing an HVAC project. The HVAC project is not being funded with the federal grant. I would argue, and we have successfully done this, the lead abatement part of that project is a distinct purpose, time, and place. You're doing the lead abatement, the window removal, the ceiling replacement. It is independent of the HVAC. So we are not going to combine those and say that's the whole project. Even if they're done at the same time, they are distinct purposes. They're distinct grants. Just for the explanation. So again, work with us. We will try to figure this out. Obviously, I have to support the statutory requirements to the best I can, but at the same time, we want to be as realistic as we can. Installation of a vapor barrier intrusion system that is going to trigger if it is permanently installed in your building. Anything that is getting permanently installed will trigger BABA. Vapor barriers, vapor the membranes that go down. If you do land, you're doing a straight dig and haul, you're just taking it away, no trigger. You backfill it with dirt, not triggering. Dirt is not covered under BABA. Cement, poured cement is not covered under BABA. However, precast cement products are. They are considered manufactured products. So you're doing a dig and haul, and then you're going to put drain pipes in. The drain pipes trigger BABA. So just FYI, that's basically where we're seeing a lot of this. Some pumps, but for the most part, this is what you're going to limit to. Monitoring wells, that type of stuff. Yes.
We have a project where we're removing the roof.
Yeah.
But then we were replacing the roof with a different grant. State grant. That.
Yes. Yes. The asbestos abatement is causing the roof to be replaced. That would be considered one lump sum project, unfortunately.
So it's like a drop, a single drop impacts.
If your activity causes the other activity to be needed. So for instance, if you just replaced you just moved the ceiling, but you didn't replace the roof. You could wait on the ceiling and not do the ceiling for a while. The roof you kind of have to do if you're replacing the roof. It does trigger, BABA would trigger in that instance. Unless you can make an argument to me how that's a different purpose and time and place, because I'm assuming you're doing the roof replacement right after.
It's not replacing the plywood.
Yeah.
The decking. So that's staying.
If you could argue you could wait on the roof replacement and it is not integral to the asbestos abatement, you could make an argument that there's a different purpose, time, and place. The more connected they are, the more difficult it is to rationalize that they're not. So we can talk. Okay. I try to push the boundaries, but I also have to be respectful of those boundaries because it actually hurts all of you if I go too far. Because then they'll question everything. Okay, what is it? Iron and steel. If you're doing rebar triggers. If you do precast concrete that has rebar in it, it's actually just the precast concrete. I don't care about the rebar because I just want to know that 50% of, there's 55% or more of the cost of that precast concrete, because it's a manufactured item, are domestically manufactured. And we'll talk about what it means to show that. Iron and steel nails, corrugated steel roofing, all of that triggers. We'll talk about waivers and how you can handle that if that's a minor component of your project. Manufactured products is the largest piece that we see across the federal government. That includes pumps, that includes precast concrete, that includes doors. So if you're doing a door with a door jamb, a window, if you're just doing the glass, that's a construction item. If you're doing a window frame with all the framing that goes with it, that is a manufactured item. Just FYI. And then construction materials, these are specifically enumerated materials. And they are listed out. It's non-ferrous metals, aluminum, plastic, polymer-based products, glass, including optical glass, fiber optic cable, lumber, drywall, and engineered wood. If you put up a new framing, that wood has to be domestically procured lumber. And all the manufacturing processes for construction materials must occur in the United States. Not as hard as it sounds, but getting the certification is the challenge right now. Excluded, cement, cementitious materials, if I'm saying that right, aggregate, stone, gravel, sand. Again, preformed concrete is not considered the same as poured cement. We had a question on rolled concrete, that is a manufactured item versus poured. So that is actually covered. Soil, flower plantings, asphalt, liquids injected, this is a big one. If you are injecting stuff for in situ chemical applications and they do not form a new structure, they just go into this, that is not covered. The water office will fight that one till the cows come home because it is critical for their program and it's not covered. However, paint, I tried to argue paint was excluded. It is not, it is considered a manufactured product. It is not considered excludable. So, compliance, I'm not gonna go through this quickly. These are the big things you need to know. Plan with BABA in mind, plan your project costs with BABA in mind, plan with the time in mind, and document. Document whatever you get. The goal here is to make sure you are protected if you are audited for anything like Davis-Bacon, we already went through this. You want to make sure that you have information that substitutes made in the USA or made in the US plant is not the same as BABA compliance. Would be nice if it was, but of course, we don't do things easily. They're not the same. You cannot substitute made in USA as, oh, I got it. It says it's made in the US. That's not the same thing. BABA waivers, there are waivers. The biggest ones you guys need to know about. There is a small, it's called small project. That's a misnomer. It's a small grant, sub-award or loan. If your loan, sub-award or grant is $250,000 or less, you automatically get a small project waiver. You are in compliance with BABA by applying the small project waiver. What we recommend, if this is the case, you send a note in as the grantee that says, hey, we've got a loan, we've got a sub-awardee, we've got somebody, me, whatever. Can you please clarify that this applies to me? EPA gets back to you and says, yes, we confirm you are validly applying the small project waiver. You don't have to do that. We recommend you do that for your records. You keep that, it is self-executing, you're done. However, if you're over 250, BABA applies. There is a de minimis waiver. That is the second biggest thing that you will want to know. 5% of your project costs can be waived, self-executing. That's how you define your project. So this is where defining your project is a catch-22. If I define my project narrowly, my costs are narrow. If I define my project broadly, my costs are bigger. My 5% is technically bigger. But now I might be incorporating more stuff than I intended. I'm not telling you how to do it, I'm just telling you that's how this is gonna be analyzed. So 5%, I am doing a lead, asbestos abatement, and I am going to need nails. I don't really feel like getting nails and figuring out who has domestically procured nails. I can take 5% of the cost and list that out and say, de minimis waiver, nail cost is 5%. You just total it up to 5% of your total project, and you put whatever you want in there. Large projects, bigger de minimis waiver. Smaller projects, narrower it is, obviously. So, MIAO, which is the OMB office that we deal with, it's very strict standards on when they will waive. That is the daily ongoing discussion. I explained to somebody before, unlike other EPA regulations, where we write the regs, we interpret the regs, we don't write them. This is kind of like the 2 CFR. It's within that section, actually, it's 184. OMB interprets it. So we are all dependent on interpretations. It's just not how we prefer to do business, but it is how we do business. You are expected to try to find domestically procured items. If you cannot find them, we can help you. We have tools to tell you how to do that. But just know that we do expect you. The tribe that got that waiver, Gun Lake Tribe, had already done a lot of pre-work on trying to find a particular product. That was used to facilitate the waiver process. It allowed us to expedite. And if you go through these slides, I'm not going to go through all of them. But that's what allowed them to move quickly. They did the initial legwork. That helped. Here's the basic requirements, the project manufacturer. So what we need, when we say we want somebody to certify compliance, as the grantee, you want to shift the liability from you to your consultant or your contractor to the manufacturer. Ultimately, the grantee is always responsible. However, if you get documentation from somebody that says, hey, yes, we are supplying you with a BABA compliant product, they just certify it. We say, yes, it meets the standards. We have an example back there in the slides. You put that in your grant files. If you're audited, you say, hey, this is what I got. I can't be expected to know their manufacturing process. Only issue is if you get something that says stamped made in China on it, you better question it because that won't fly. Basic stuff. You have to maintain your documentation. This is the steps of compliance. This is the key part of this process that I need you guys to focus on. I'm not going to go through all of it. This is a really long slide deck. Again, I don't have all the time to go through it, but I wanted to leave it all in here so that you had a reference point to work with. Initially, you're going to figure out whether or not you think it applies. If it does, we break it down and we figure out what's there. This is a sample RFP. This is what we're recommending if you're issuing a solicitation, that you include something to this effect. It's not set in stone, but this is essentially what you want. Again, this is all in here. This is just the process. This is the waiver process. This is the part that takes the time. So you've gone through everything. This is essentially what it took to get that waiver done. We started that waiver process after the tribe had already done their due diligence in July. The waiver was issued in October. Not that bad in government speed, but they had done a lot of work beforehand. Then we go and do our own search. Then we go to OMB. OMB says, did you consider X, Y, and Z? The tribe actually amended the waiver, pulled out shipping container because that was causing problems. It only went with the aerobic digester. That expedited the process. We were able to issue that quicker that way. That was the tribe's decision. I will never tell you how to run your project. That's another issue we're running into. It's people second guessing whether you need the item. EPA has pushed back and said, we don't second guess why our grantees need what they need. That is not our role. If this is a technical specification that they need, that is the technical specification they need. It is not for others to second guess. So this is the certification. This is what you want if you are doing a project and you have to comply. You want something that says, I certify this project from the manufacturer. This is easier said than done. Smaller manufacturers are at an advantage right now because they understand this is an opportunity for them to market themselves. They can get ahead. So if you're dealing with small manufacturers in your area, maybe not in your area, it is advantageous for them from a business perspective to undertake the cost review to see what products meet BABA compliance standards. Larger manufacturers are the most difficult for us to deal with. We can't get through to them. We can't hear them. It's a challenge. We're working on that. We had a company, example of a company, different grant program, makes composting bins. They said, I don't know if we can do this. I said, well, here's the thing. If you can meet this 55% test, they can buy it from you. And then you can advertise it. And they went through it. They came back and they said, actually, we can meet this test. CEO certified it. City went ahead and bought what they wanted. They're now advertising they're BABA compliant. There's an English manufacturer of the same type of product. They do not certify because they make it in England. They're bringing their manufacturing base here so that they can. That's the intent of this law. It's just the application of it is challenging. So here's some more information. I'm working on updating the FAQs. That's the BABA OLA email address. You should work with your project officer. Your project officer should be working with me. Do not work on this on your own. You can, but we don't recommend it. And then I do recommend the project officers consult with me, and I work with our headquarters folks to make sure this is done. Here is something, if you're going out to a manufacturer is balking at giving you or doing a certification. This is the new focus for us, by the way. It is advantageous to them to figure this out. 2 reasons. Federal contracting also has actually slightly tougher standards. And all grants have to do this, not just EPA. The biggest one, iron and steel, it has to be smelted. The whole process has to be domestic manufacturing here. Construction materials have a different standard. The biggest thing that we're seeing here is the specific standards for construction materials. If some folks are asking, this is the biggest one. 55% of the components of the manufactured product, total cost of the components. This is not as hard as people thought. And this is the thing we're trying to dispel right now. It essentially, here's my example. This is overly simplistic example of a box truck. The components, steel undercarriage, manufactured in Michigan, aluminum frame, manufactured. I'm not asking about where the aluminum came from. I'm not asking where the steel came from. They just need to tell me they manufactured in the United States. So I don't get below that level. That's a massive interpretation that we need. Fiberglass is manufactured in Indiana. Chassis made in New York. I get a lighting kit from Canada. That's how I'm determining. Obviously, this is overly simplistic. I'm determining the cost, the shipping, etc. Comes out that 96.6%, 96% of this is domestic cost of the components. It's made in the United States. This meets BABA compliance. So if you have a manufacturer and they say, no, this is too hard, I can't do it. It's not as hard as they think. It may not be as difficult, and it is advantageous to them. I am happy to talk to anybody about this too, by the way. Things to know, final assemblage costs are not used, profit is not used. That's not for you to worry about, that's for the manufacturers to worry about, but that's how they get to be able to certify. So that's the long and short of BABA. Those are the key things you need to know. I'll be here for a while, and I have to get on, actually, I'm gonna do another presentation for the Swiffer folks this afternoon. Any questions? Feel free to reach out to me. It's Wilbur, WILBUR.Jennifer@EPA.gov. Please always CC your project officer if you do reach out to me directly. I will then involve Elise Salinas in Brownfields or our other counterparts in Olam to make sure they're aware of what's going on. And we work through it. I do one-on-one all the time. So just feel free to reach out, ask questions. We did get a question while I was waiting to come up here, just so you know, RLF, private borrower, private site. If it is a for-profit or private borrower. Only private, I don't mean public housing and multi-use, because multi-use triggers public access. Purely private use is not subject to BABA. Just FYI. It is one of the few things we can say definitively. I had a private nonprofit in Alaska buy a shredder. That shredder was going to be used only by commercial clients on a private pier, no public access. That was determined to not be subject to BABA. If it had public use, it triggers BABA. Most brownfields projects are public use. You're rarely going to see that exception. Just letting you know that is one that might come up potentially on our left side. So just got that question actually this morning. So that's it for me. We good?
I
Yep.
have two quick questions.
Yep.
Is BABA applicable to any federal funds or just projects being funded under bill?
Nope, every federal fund. We originally thought it was just bill, and then we read it. And I was doing a different job at the time. I was the senior budget officer for all of them. And worked on all of bill funding, the whole thing, and we read it. And we went, oh God, this is not going away. Like we had Buy America under, for those of you that were around 2009. When we got influx of funds back then, we had American iron and steel requirements. We had similar requirements, but it went away. This is permanent. Doesn't matter the source of the funding. So.
And then that, I guess, led to my second question. Is this just new? Like, will it ever go away?
Nope, it's permanent. There's a statute, Congress would need to overturn it. We are all subject to it. You are all subject to it. You cannot escape it. So best to understand what it is. It's like Davis Bacon, really is. Nope, it is why I now have a full-time job not doing what I was doing before. And I go around talking to people about this. I talk to manufacturers, I go to trade shows, I just babble on about BABA. Just remember sheep, BABA, black sheep, BABA, and then you'll know, am I doing anything that is doing construction, altering a building, altering the land? If you are, follow up with us, make sure you know what you're doing. So we'll do the best we can. Yep.
Can you just explain a little more about that $250,000?
So it's a de minimis waiver. It's on our website. Let me see if I can go back. Essentially, it's one of the key waivers that we have. All waivers are actually time limited to 5 years. So de minimis waiver is the second one. Small project waiver, top one. Waivers, entire project with EPA or subaward is under 250. I'd say 250 or less. Does expire in 2027. We will work to extend that. I guarantee that will be worked to be extended. Just FYI. So if it's a subaward, the subawardee will want something from EPA that says we agree. You, the grantee, will probably want something that say we're giving a subaward for $249,000. Is this de minimis a small project waiver available? We would reply yes, that is within. We found that already. Stick it in your grant file, good to go. Loan, same thing. However, don't try to break out your subawards for the same project just to get around this, because again, using purpose, time, and place, same purpose, same time, same place, you're gonna still trigger BABA if you go over. So be careful. They will look for that. I had a grantee come in and ask, I got an offer to buy this for whatever amount, and it just fit under the de minimis waiver. I said, well, technically you can do it, but just make sure that, you're not looking like you're trying to subvert things. So these are the other agency-wide waivers right now. The electric vehicle chargers expired. They are working to extend that, I believe. They're also working on a solar waiver. So solar panels are really difficult to come domestically. There are other program-specific waivers, not all of them. Ours expired, which is an adjustment period. The Air Office has some significant waivers on school buses if anybody's getting any air grants. I need to point out if you get any CPRG funds, which are the clean air project or something, those funds specifically exclude rolling stock. I'm not going to get into why. Just know that if you have them or somebody says it doesn't apply, that is only for that project, those particular grants. So, anything else? All right, thank you, guys.
The total project cost is $300,000.
No,
What is that small project like?
it's only, so that's the misnomer. So the question is, what if my project is under 250? I had an absolute fit about this one, to be perfectly frank. That's how we interpreted it. We were told no, despite the fact that it says small project, it's small award, sub-award, or loan, not the project. So it's not, don't look at it from a project perspective. You can't parse your project out. It is whether the grant, the sub-award, or the loan is 250 or less.
So that for an hour grant, most of our projects are under 250,000. That means probably will not apply.
If your loan is under 250, it would not apply. If your sub-award is under 250, it does not apply. The RLF loan itself is generally over 250, because usually you're looking at, 1 to 5, whatever it is. But the individual award is what you're looking at. So, yeah. Make sense? Somewhat? Happy to parse it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just for clarification, if I did a $250,000 sub-grant, the $250,000 loan on the same project,
That is not a waiver. Because you just told me it's the same project. So you can't. So now you're over 250 on the same project. They're gonna include that as one overall I can go back and ask if you want. I can tell you, most likely you're gonna say no, because you're trying to get around it, because the project itself is now over 250. I would love to make that argument, and I will take that back and let you know what I find out. But I'm gonna be told I'm being cute and trying to get away with something. So just, I've already tried multiple things and been told that.
A lot of times, separately QEP costs.
Yep.
And that is paid for by the grant theater contractual.
Yeah.
And then give it $249,000.
Yeah.
So that's still a $250,000.
In that instance, your QEP part of the project, I would argue, is a different purpose, time, and place. Different purpose, because the purpose is the evaluation. The grant, it could be different, right? You do your QEP first, then you do the other part of it second. They're distinct. You might decide you don't want to do the second part, right? You might decide that we're not doing it. I would argue they're distinct. Also, the QEP itself should not trigger BABA. So it's only the stuff that actually triggers BABA that gets counted in that. If you did the loan for 500,000, right? Say you're doing one total loan, and that includes the QEP, it includes the actual work. You could use the total project. This is where the cost of the project becomes an issue. The total project would be $500,000. Your de minimis is 5% of that. If your project is 250, because you're partitioning it out, your de minimis is now only 5% of 250. So depending on what you think you're going to get, you might want to define your project as larger. Still doesn't treat the non-construction doesn't trigger BABA. It's the total project cost that you want for de minimis. So I can go through this in specifics to figure out what's most advantageous. Depends on what you want to do. Is it better to be out of it, or is it better to be having, say you're over 250, because 250 is not a good example, but yeah, there's different ways to look at this. Bottom line is it's here, it's not going away. Know what it is, here to help. So any other questions? Okay. Good luck. Thank you.
We wanna specifically thank Jen for calling all the way up from DC. It's fantastic, they really made the effort, coming here with Montana, and we are. I understand. Talking before about when you are our right fit, so you would do that.
My usual MO is if I tell you no, it is active and exercise every possible way to get it to yes. That has been Brownfields MO for years, I started in the day. If I say no, it's usually a pretty good reason, so just FYI.
So for the online folks, Jennifer just said that if she tells, if you reach out to her with a question and she says no, it's usually because she has already checked and has advocated for you and has gotten a decision, from elsewhere. Okay, so our next session here, we're gonna go through, 4 brief presentations on 4, common remedial, methodologies. So first, we're gonna have Brandon Kingsbury from Tetra Tech, followed by Mike Kelly from Brownfields, then Andrew Van from Tri-Hydro, and Tyler Etzel from WGM. All right, and Brandon, I will hand it over to you.
Please stand up there.
Hi, everybody. So, I'm Brandon Kingsbury. I'm from Tetra Tech, but, previously I worked for DEQ Petroleum Tank Cleanup Section and also for the Petro Fund.
You want the clicker?
So, I have a bit of experience in petroleum tank cleanup. So as I go through this, if you have any, questions as I go, please interrupt me. So I'm going to talk to you guys about phase 2 assessments and where those typically lead when we go through like a tank pull or look at one of those old gas station sites, and try to walk you through the whole process from that first assessment to cleanup. So you're doing that tank pull. You get into the ground, you find a tank like this. It's been sitting there for who knows, decades. And as you're looking at it a little more closely, you find this picture on the left, which is not what you necessarily want to find, but it's not a matter of if tanks leak, it's when they did. And the older the tank, the more likely it was to leak. So if you find this, the first thing you really want to do is contact your DEQ. Because as was mentioned yesterday, if you find a petroleum release, you want to report it within 24 hours. If you don't report it, then that could jeopardize your Petro Fund eligibility. And also it gets the ball rolling because once the ball does get rolling, it is kind of a lengthy process to get into further assessment, cleanup, and eventually site closure. When you assess it, you want to determine the full extent of contamination. Impacted media typically are air, soil, and groundwater. And when you do that phase 2 assessment, that's not going to get it fully assessed. There's going to be multiple assessments that you have to go through. So in this picture, we have a site that was a START investigation. And actually it had been assessed a couple times before this. If anybody knows what START is, that's the EPA TBA program. But the state also provides TBAs for petroleum cleanups. And as a grantee, you guys also have the ability to do these phase 2 site assessments as well. A phase 2 ESA with the petroleum cleanup can come in at any sort of real phase in the investigation process. It can be that first tank pull where you're finding petroleum. It can be one where it's already a registered release with the state and you're just trying to fill a data gap so that you can move it towards more of a cleanup phase. So right here is a picture of a conceptual site model of a tank and all the potential like exposure pathways. We have a building here. The tank was next to it. It leaked. You can kind of see where petroleum contamination went through the ground. It got into groundwater and it's starting to spread. There's this acronym in there. It's called LNAPL.
A lot of you probably aren't familiar with LNAFL, but what that is light non-aqueous phase liquid. And what that is pretty much is gas or diesel. It's lighter than water. So it's going to sit on top of the water and it's going to spread. As it spreads, it also becomes somewhat dissolved. So you have a dissolved phase plume, and you also have vadostone contamination. That contamination, though, it remains in the soil. Some of it gets sorbed to soil. Some of it actually gets volatilized and goes up underneath your building. And so you have air, soil, and water impacts that you have to face. And through the assessment process, what the state wants, what the feds want, is they want all that to be fully characterized. So it might be shocking sometimes when you've done a phase 1, you've done a phase 2, but then the state comes back and says, hey, you've got to assess this more. And it may be a couple phases before you actually move to that point where you can use like an RLF to go ahead and clean up that site. So I'm going to walk you through looking at each impacted media and how we clean those things up. So let's look at air first. A lot of times you want to redevelop before the state's done actually like regulating a site. And one way to clean up a site so that you're not having impacts to human receptors is to put in, say, like a subslab decompression system. This is kind of a diagram here of that. So you have that plume underlying your building. Usually what happens is you put in like a vapor barrier, and then you also have underneath that some sort of piping system. They can come in different shapes and sizes. A radon abatement system is a good example of a subslab decompression system. And pretty much what it's doing is it's intercepting any vapors coming up underneath the building. And then it can be either a passive system where it's just venting, or it can be an active system. And active systems oftentimes will have inline fans. And what they do is they pretty much circumvent any of those vapors from going inside the building, and it prevents occupants from breathing that contamination.
That would have to be followed.
Justin, that
So anyways. One of the more effective ways to clean up soil though in the state is soil removal. And this is where you go in and just, you find that source mass, you've done those multiple assessments, you found the greatest extent of contamination, and you provided a plan, usually through like an analysis of brownfields cleanup alternatives, but also on the state side, they require what's called a remedial alternatives analysis. Basically the same thing. Willie talked about that yesterday. And what it is it's a feasibility study. You're looking at cost effectiveness, implementability, safety, protection of the environment, and overall costs, including long-term monitoring costs. And once the selected remedy is chosen, then you're going to go into cleanup. And usually excavation is the most effective cleanup. It does require that you have a site that's, accessible. A lot of our sites that we work on are in downtown areas where it's pretty tight and you can only do a limited dig out. But for sites that are like that corner gas station, they're usually fairly open and you can excavate. When you excavate, we try to get clean margins on your soil. So we're usually removing thousands of cubic yards. We dig down to groundwater, try to clean out that smear zone in groundwater. And then what do we do with that soil? Usually we take it either to an approved landfill. A lot of landfills will accept it as cover, depending on how it tests. But Other times you can actually do what's called a one-time land farm. DEQ does allow permitting for up to 2,400 cubic yards of land farm soil. And this really can cut down on hauling costs. So, let's say you have that site out in, Glasgow or maybe it's, Malta or something like that, and it's, 50 or 100 miles to the closest landfill. Well, if you can find a farmer that's willing to take that soil, you can do the proper land improvements and get that one-time land farm permitting. And a land farm permit is only about $500, but it does require a little more QEP oversight, some testing, and vetting of that land to actually get it approved as a land farm. But it really does cut down in the long term on your hauling costs. I mean, the difference in hauling, 50 miles versus to a land farm a couple miles away is tens of thousands of dollars. So that's a huge part of your petroleum dig out costs. When you have a land farm, you might be thinking, well, we just moved contaminated soil to another spot. Like, what are we actually doing here? Well, unlocking that soil from the ground really does allow it to attenuate quicker. Gasoline constituents, some diesel constituents, they're very volatile, but they're also, when they're locked in the ground, they're not being biodegraded as quickly. So if you bring them out, put them on an approved land farm, they're getting tilled, exposed to the sun, exposed to the air, and usually within a couple seasons, a couple summers of tilling, that soil is then able to be returned back into the ground, and it really tests out clean. So land farming is a really great option. So let's talk.
Do you have like recommendations on how like broker or land farmer, that you just go to like random people and say, hey man, can you put this on your, like go to the local property owner across the street or whatever?
That's how it is. I mean, it's really like the good old boy system here in Montana. And you start calling around, if you can find a farmer close to a site, and go knock on their door, however you can get a hold of them.
Do you think farmers or municipal land?
Often the construction guys, they have farmer friends, and that's a good place to start.
Do you pay them?
Yes, so usually that's a good question. There usually is a tipping fee that you negotiate with them. But to put this in perspective, like I've gone to a landfill in eastern Montana, commercial landfill, and they're saying, oh, that's petroleum contaminated soil. That's $35 a ton to dispose of. I can go to a land farm, a farmer, and let's say I have 5,000 cubic yards to dispose of. We might negotiate out $10 a cubic yard. So that's a huge cost saving just right there at what we call a tipping fee.
That was my question, so was there a benefit to the person taking the money to incentivize them to actually take it?
Yes, there is. And actually, I'm working on a site in eastern Montana right now where I'm trying to negotiate that. And it's looking like through those negotiations, I'll probably be able to save the RLF about $50,000 to $60,000 through that process.
Is that on our site?
It is.
Who guarantees the farmer rancher that the soil will be good at the end of the several years? Yeah, I'm trying to say.
So, I mean, it will clean up. The question was, how do I guarantee that the soil will be clean after a few years, and give those assurances to the land farmer? One way that we do that is by working in kind of a long-term maintenance plan for that soil that will be above and beyond. So yeah, they typically clean up in like 2 to 3 years, but in the cost estimates up front, we may put in that it requires 6 years of tilling, just to keep those assurances. One thing that we do though is we do have the ability to modify these plans, especially if they're backed by the Petro Fund. And so, we get into it, we pull that soil out, and it looks like it's not just residual impacted soil, but it's actually like soil that's impacted with like free product. That's where we might, give that documentation to the Petro Fund and say, hey, this is a lot worse than we expected. We are gonna need more disposal costs, and then we quantify that land farming cost into those disposal costs.
Sorry, guys, we just need, we've got to get through a lot of content, so let's get questions for the end.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I want to talk about remediation of groundwater impacts. Again, that soil removal, it will remove a lot of that smear zone. So that's one way to really get out that source mass. And then usually that really speeds up attenuation in groundwater. But often you don't have that soil removal. So you need to find some other effective methodology to go in and remediate it. I have one example here is air sparging and soil vapor extraction. And what that is pretty much is you're putting in wells that go down below the water column. And then it's bubbling oxygen into the system. By that movement of air, it's actually generating kind of disturbance there. And it's pulling a lot of those volatiles up towards the surface. And then it's combined with a vapor extraction system. This is a blower that's hooked up and it's sitting right above your water level. And it's pulling those vapors off of the soil at the same time. So it's kind of a dual phase system where you're oxygenating the water, you're improving biodegradation, you're moving that contamination, disturbing it, and then making it available so that it can be extracted from the ground in a vapor phase. These systems, when they're put in, they're usually effective for a couple years, and then through ongoing monitoring, usually on like a monthly or quarterly basis, we start to see where they start to plateau off and they're no longer effective. But that means that they're really cleaning up the groundwater. And site-specific geology is really important in vetting whether this can be used. So there are other methodologies for cleaning up groundwater as well. Another one is in situ treatment. This is where we might inject in groundwater, and what we would inject usually is something that will improve the groundwater quality to a point where enhanced biodegradation can occur. That's stimulating bacteria, that's increasing oxygen. On the left here, this is like a gridded set of probes where you're injecting into the various contaminated zones in the groundwater. You can put anything from hydrogen peroxide to persulfate to permanganate. It depends on the nature of the plume, but there's a lot of different products out there that can be used to enhance biodegradation or physically break down the petroleum. So this is something that's sometimes an option when you have that site that's, tighter, you can't necessarily get in and dig it out. Or it's something where your time frame is a little bit longer, or you're doing polishing. Sometimes you'll dig out like a source mass area, but you won't get it all. And so you do have to target and clean up something that's maybe right up next to a building or right up next to a road. And this might be a good alternative. On the right, what I have here is a diagram of injection and extraction wells. You'll be injecting maybe some product in there, but then you might also be extracting that treated water afterwards and doing a pump and treat system. That's where you're pulling water out, you're cycling it through like granulated activated carbon or some other filtration system. And then you might be injecting it back into the ground. And so you can either have a closed loop or it might be an open loop system. So just because you can't dig it out doesn't mean you can't still remediate it. And that's where you're looking at these alternatives through the APCA, the RAA process. So then there's follow-up monitoring. Oftentimes you've got, after you clean it up, the state still wants to see the site monitored. So you'll have maybe a number of events that you have to monitor to see that those levels have dropped below groundwater cleanup standards. So this might go on, but you can also include this phase of it in your cleanup planning. And so that would be included under your RO. And then eventually you get to that golden ticket, which is that no further corrective action letter, and then you're off to groundbreaking ceremony. But I will say that you can still have a petroleum release site and it can be active, but you're still at a redevelopment phase. So don't think that a petroleum release can prevent you from moving on to redevelopment. That's all I have.
Okay, we're gonna leave on the house.
All right, hello, everybody. My name is Michael Kelly. I work with Viewfields. I've been working there since about 2016. Started out doing groundwater for the first 3-4 years. Somewhere in there, transitioned to this fun stuff. Asbestos, lead, radon, methamphetamines, all that good stuff. Partially, it was probably because I did mineral exploration leading up to Newfields, and I got to go look at minerals again. There's not that much actually looking at minerals. Asbestos is quite straightforward in the building materials, but I'll tell you about it. So here are the main ones that we deal with: asbestos, lead, PCBs, radon, methamphetamine, fentanyl, mold, and more. Asbestos, lead, PCBs, mercury. I'm going to talk only about those today. I might hit on methamphetamine a little bit. So I'll be going through the sampling, the cleanup process, kind of the steps in between, some costs. So the building on the bottom right, that's the El Centro Motel. Put that up here for you, Carly. We got that one finished recently with the abatement. So top left picture is naturally occurring asbestos. That's a chrysotile in a rock. It's a little vein of it. The asbestos itself, if encountered in nature, is not actually very much of a harm. It's where we come in to play that made it a problem. When we mill it down and turn it into tiny little fibers and use it how we want to use it, and we create a high dose that when you inhale it, it's dangerous. Picture in the middle, that's asbestos fibers, probably andesites under polarized light microscopy. That's the same thing we use to identify minerals in a rock. And it is a mineral, and therefore it has different colors that show up as you change your microscope around. The picture on the right, some really ugly pipes. A lot of water damage on those, but we're specifically looking at fittings on those ones. Those are mudded fittings that were spread over pipes when wet. And nowadays, if you grab it, they will crumble to the ground, and asbestos fibers get released into the air. So picture on the left here, that was a fun find. That was at the Jolly Swagman, Wilfred. That was a fun project. They that still had the shipping labels and everything from pre-1978. It's air cell pipe insulation. So asbestos itself, there's 6 naturally occurring minerals out there. For the most part, chrysotile is what we deal with. It's in 95% of the building materials that have asbestos. They're all dangerous, but just treat them all. The reason we use them, they were cheap, naturally occurring, abundant, high tensile strength. If you pull on it like a Tootsie Roll, they're very resistant. Chemical and thermal stability, that was a big part of why we used them. I don't know if there's any chemicals that will dissolve asbestos. Thermal, part of the name is derived, I can't remember the exact words, but it basically means inflammable. And then low electrical conductivity, some other uses. Started up in the 1800s. It peaked about 1950 to the 70s. It started being phased out up until it was banned in 1978. The reason we still are concerned about asbestos is that Other countries haven't necessarily banned it, or might not be managing exports very well, and are still sending asbestos around. It still gets mistakenly put into all sorts of things or imported. And so you'll most commonly find it in thermal system installations, like that picture of the ugly pipes, just because it was really good for withstanding heat and putting up with moisture in that environment. You'll also find it commonly in the vinyl floor tiles, like over in this room over here. Completely fine in the nature that they're in. They're sealed up very well. Given time, fibers will start to release. But vinyl floor tiles is a pretty safe example, because the asbestos was mostly used in the mastic, the black mastic in particular, that seals them to the ground. It's also found in boiler insulation, vinyl, or actually vinyl sheet flooring, it's commonly see it there. Drywall systems, anywhere you cover up a nail or seam between sheets of drywall. Surfacing, orange peel texture, popcorn ceilings, all that good stuff. And vermiculite insulation, particularly in Montana, since we mined it here significantly. And roofing, you'll usually see it in the tar in the built-up roofing. The problem is when we inhale it, the fibers get lodged into our lungs, our immune system attacks that thing trying to dissolve it. It doesn't dissolve, it creates scarring, and it builds up until you get asbestosis, mesothelioma, lung cancer, and some other problems. Inhalation is by far the worst. It's not good to eat it, but it was used as a leavening agent in muffins at one time. Next up, lead paint. Lead paints, can be a really pretty problem until it becomes like the picture in the bottom right there. Most commonly that I feel like I deal with it is window systems. So the lead was added, the lead carbonate and lead chromate, I know the colors you're looking for, was added pretty early on in the started out in the 4th century, different pottery, different art started using it. Kind of impressive they figured it out back then. Peaked in the 1800s and 1920s, and then banned in 1978, similar to asbestos. So it was used because it was very opaque. It made a really nice white. It dried really quickly. It was resistant to water and many other reasons, actually. So window systems, oftentimes it'll be used on one part of the window, not another part. It's kind of interesting. That's why when you do a lead-based inspection, you have to check all the different components of the window. Exterior for the moisture component, you'll have it on fascia, you'll have it on soffits, you'll have it on the exterior side of doors, come across a lot. Also ceramic tiles, sinks, toilets, bathtubs, a lot of them with the old claw feet have that in them. It's not near as toxic in that form as it is in the paint, because the paint crumbles, goes into the air, you breathe it, kids get their hands on it, eat it, tastes good. I haven't tried it myself. So it's highly toxic to humans, especially children, damages your vital organs, it causes behavioral problems, learning disabilities, which is where it's usually noticed first in schools, can cause seizures, can cause death at a rate it goes. And the more and more we learn about it, the more we learn how bad it is. And that's why the standards for clearances and such keep going down and down and down. And so what is lead-based paint? Lead-based paint is anything that's 1 milligram per square inch or more. The reason there's that measurement is because when you use an X-ray fluorescence gun, that is the measuring surface in the front. And that's just a reliable way to find out what the concentration is. That doesn't mean that anything less than that is not a problem. Between 0 and 1 milligram is what we usually call lead-containing paint. It's not as well defined as lead-based paint, but when it comes to OSHA and other considerations, it is still very harmful. Moving on to PCBs. The background photo there is where we most commonly encounter PCBs, and that is on light ballasts. So it's a group of synthetic organic chemicals, really resistant to heat, doesn't burn easily, often with electrical components. It causes cancer, birth defects, and a lot of other things that are kind of up in the air. The more we learn, it's harmful. Typical locations, fluorescent light fixtures. Whenever we do a building materials inspection, hazardous buildings material survey, we'll take apart the fixture and find out whether there's a ballast in there and whether it says no PCBs, because anything after 1979, they started stamping no PCBs. We'll also find electrical transformers. If it spills out of those, you'll see an impact on the ground beneath the electrical pole of no plants growing means profits. Disposal, it is usually the abatement company takes it back to their place, stores it. Hazardous waste transporters come by on a milk run, take it out, incinerate it. Mercury. So mercury is most commonly used in fluorescent lights, or at least that's where we most commonly encounter it. You put electricity into a light tube, it excites the mercury atoms, they produce UV radiation. UV radiation is then absorbed by phosphors and becomes visible light. And so basically all fluorescent lights have some amount of mercury vapor in them. Thermostats, the liquid mercury or quicksilver also means. It's a really good electrical conductor. It's thermal, it expands and contracts at right about the right temperature for controlling thermostat and creating a switch to turn heat on and off. And so these are both basically visual inspections. Confirm they're there, put them on the abatement company's list of items, and they take them away. Damage from mercury, neurological system, kidneys, heart, lung, immune system, and much more. So a typical hazardous building material survey for asbestos, walk around the building, you find out how many materials in this building are we dealing with. If it's a giant warehouse, you're lucky, there's not much going on. If it's an office space where everybody had a different floor, you're kind of in for a mess. And then you create a map of the building. Usually you take a fire escape map, start drawing on that, show all your sample locations. You then go room by room, collecting a little piece of that building, slowly demolishing the building as you go. I had a client once tell me that. I was demolishing a building, and if I could pick up my samples at a higher rate, they could deal with that building quicker. And so then you put chain of custody, you document, send them off to the laboratory. They use polarized light microscopy, like that first slide there of asbestos with colorful fibers. They tell you how much percentage of asbestos each material has. And then you come up with your report describing your methods, all the asbestos materials you found in that building, what's the extent of them, what's the category of asbestos, what the abatement is going to look like. And so suspect building materials. It used to always say wood, glass, metal, those, everything but those. Now, as of 2024, the asbestos control program included treated wood. So we only have 2 materials that are not suspect anymore. So the lead-based paint component, we grab our Star Trek phaser, we assemble and calibrate it, and then we walk into a room and we start pretty easy, wall, look at the ceiling, hopefully it's a drop ceiling that's not painted. However, you gotta look above that, you might find a tin ceiling that has been painted. You just gotta analyze everything. And you look for crown molding, trimmed, doors, windows. It's a lot of time spent scanning, but it's great that you can have instant results. Then we create a table, put it into the hazardous building material survey report, and we start calculating out how much of the materials need to be removed. Universal waste, I squeezed it into this little part of the slide because it's pretty simple. We disassemble light fixtures, we find out if there's PCBs in the ballast, we find out how many light tubes are in the building, we find out how many thermostats have liquid mercury, and we document that. These are the steps leading up to an abatement. I think we covered that pretty well in the presentations before this. But this is kind of my typical steps that I look at. The picture right there is actually an interesting one where there was wood panels over the walls or over wall panels, and they were able to trace the adhesive out as they scraped out all the asbestos. Asbestos abatement, you can do a full, a partial, you can encapsulate the asbestos, you can enclose the asbestos. It all kind of comes down to the amount of money in the project. Preparation starts, abatement crew comes in, seals off everything, covers all the vents, covers anything that can escape the room, puts on the negative air machine so they're sucking air out of the room and so it cannot contaminate anything else in the building. And then they start the very hard labor of scraping and lots of vacuuming, lots of detailed cleaning. It's a lot of work. Floors, you can actually, oftentimes if it's a wood floor and this mastic has seeped into it because it's a porous material, you just cut the entire subfloor out and take it out. Other times, it's a lot of time spent on hands and knees, scraping, chiseling. Walls, most of the time it's easiest just to demolish the wall. Windows, you can chisel out the glazing, or you can just take the whole window out and throw it away. Unless it's a historic window, then you're up for a lot more costs. Loose insulation, vermiculite, typical problem around Montana. A lot of vacuuming, hand bagging. Sometimes you'll have an entire trailer that's filled up as a vacuum, expanding it. It's a pretty nifty system. Disposal, with asbestos, it's always pretty well double bagged, wet, very wet. Or if you're doing a demolition with asbestos, it's burrito wrapped, where the trailers are lined beforehand, loaded materials, seal it up with a second layer, staple it, nail it, send it off to landfill. Has to go to a class 2 or a class 4 landfill. These are rough costs. I gave some ranges, and it depends on a full array of factors. With vinyl floor tile mastic, depends on whether it's on floor or if it's on wood floor, concrete floor, how many layers there are, is there carpet on top of it, all these questions you gotta ask. Drywall, joint compound, fairly expensive. Surfacing is the next level because it's a regulated material, so it's more likely to put asbestos fibers in the air. Straight pipe insulation, kind of depends on your access, whether you're crawling on your stomach trying to get to it. Mudded fittings are quite expensive, depends on how many you can put in one bag. Window glazing, the cheap end right there is you bust the window out of the building and throw it away, and the building's ready for demolition. The expensive one is you disassemble it, you take off every bit of asbestos glazing, you re-glaze it, you put it back in the building. Light tubes, pretty straightforward. Company just comes in, rapidly takes them all out, takes them to the crusher. PCD valves, same thing. And don't ever forget to account for mobilization. It can be significant. That's a hard one to predict the cost because some companies need to have a lot of money up front, and it's the first thing they can charge on the invoice. And so you'll see a very cheap cost with a very high mobilization sometimes. And then the DEQ's asbestos unit of measure, the asbestos control program put out a little table that how much quantity of regulated asbestos materials you have determines how much you have to pay the DEQ. Oversight. So after abatement takes place, to say that it's safe for somebody to re-enter the building, we come in and visually clear the area, make sure that there's nothing asbestos remaining, there's no dust. We take a leaf blower, stir up the room real good. We set up our pumps, sample. We dissolve those samples onto a microscope lens, look at them through a microscope, count fibers. Lead paint abatement, it is not often required in industrial or commercial. It depends on whether it is a child occupied building. Daycares are one of those commercial child occupied buildings that would need clearance. It's lead paint abatement is very expensive. And so oftentimes it'll come down to encapsulation instead of full abatement. Historic tax credits, that usually drives whether there is windows that are being disassembled, scraped, reassembled. It can be a bait or encapsulation. Clearances depend on whether there was dust containment or no dust containment. T-clip, if you want to dispose of it in landfill, they need a T-clip, which is toxicity characteristic leaching procedure, sample results, or in Montana, if you're demolishing the entire building, it's been proven that it is usually not enough lead to create a leaching problem in the environment. The clearance levels just went down. You collect dust white samples, send them to the lab. This is going to be difficult to make, but it just requires that places are very clean. Universal waste, like I mentioned before, it's basically a milk run. Hazardous waste shippers come through and collect them throughout the state from the different big companies. Sorry, I zipped through that. Do you guys, anybody have any questions?
Just one quick one.
Yeah.
Will your slides be available on the website?
Yes.
Yeah.
You can find all the mistakes.
Yes. Okay. Oh, thank you, Mike. All right. Quick round of applause. Thank you for this. Yes, so all of the slides are available on, so the page that you registered, it's ksutab.org, go to the events page. All the files are uploaded for both the virtual and in-person pages, so it doesn't matter which one you click on, and it should have like a combined presentation where all the slides are there. There's one presentation missing from yesterday, but I'll get that uploaded. That was the historic preservation, I'll get that uploaded, today. Okay, Andrea?
Yeah,
And I'll give you a.
yeah, I can maybe go a little faster.
Yeah. 15 is fine.
Okay. Right. Hi, I'm Andrew Van, with Tri-Hydro. Been working on soil and groundwater contamination for over 20 years now, so gonna try and keep it short, skip through a couple of these that Brandon and others have talked to. Oh, sure.
Could you stand on the ship on the stage there too? Thank you.
All right. Hope I don't fall. Okay, so a contaminant, this is the EPA definition, harmful or hazardous matter introduced into the environment. Key piece of that, if it's not present above a regulatory level, then you may not need to worry about it. So metals, for example, they're really widespread. Chances are you'll detect them in soil at least. But if it's not present above a screening level, then you probably can move on. So kinds of contaminated sites. This is not exclusive by any means, but you know, pretty standard facilities that you might think of. A lot of petroleum out there at many of these sites. Chlorinated solvents are also a common contaminant. It's really good at dissolving grease and you know, cleaning things, and also quite toxic, unfortunately. So so that's a common component. A couple of these that are of recent concern, both electroplating and firefighting facilities commonly use PFAS, which is now a regulated contaminant. So something to consider that is maybe kind of new. The firefighting, you know, a fire station may have stored the firefighting foam on site, and that in itself would be a problem, but they often would also practice with that, and you know, that might have been the parking lot or the vacant lot next door or whatever, where they just discharge it on the ground and let it go. Mining facilities, obviously metals are an issue there. The one interesting thing about that is you don't necessarily have to have a mining or be on a mine site to be impacted by that. A lot of times historically, the metals impacted soil or even waste rock was used as fill material elsewhere. So you might be, you know, 15, 20, 30 miles away, still have mine impacts from that. All right, so identifying the nature and extent of contamination, the purpose here is to understand, both how much contamination you have and where it is, how far it's gone. The phase one ESA, you're probably fairly familiar with that. It's a, document site history review to evaluate if there is a potential issue there. But you're not typically collecting samples. Phase two, you will go out to the site, collect soil, groundwater, soil vapor, indoor air, surface water samples. That's where you're really evaluating that nature and extent. So, as far as soil and groundwater, this example here is a simple gas station. Buildings are gone, tanks are gone. We installed, the 4 monitoring wells and the black dots, collected soil samples. We can measure the depth of groundwater, use that to evaluate which direction groundwater is flowing. So that's the blue arrow. And then, use that to evaluate, which wells are up gradient, which wells are down gradient, where the contamination might be. So, there's a lot of cleanup alternatives out there. You could probably have, or there are conferences on that exclusively. And Brandon talked about a few of these already. I'll go through those pretty quickly. And again, like the site conditions here are absolutely critical. Both your contaminant conditions as well as the geology, the surface features, all of those factors play into it. So there's not going to be a one size fits all approach by any means to any of this. So, I'll jump through these really quickly. Excavation, if you need to remove some really contaminated soil and you need to do it quick, that's kind of, the only way. Not gonna work if you've got a building, for example, but these photos are from the Walk-Around House, Deer Lodge, dealing with some petroleum impacted soil, and on the left, and then some of the yards were impacted by metals. So we dig out the top 2 feet that people might be exposed to through direct contact, replace it with clean fill. The injections, these are both direct push injections, with a direct push drill rig. They drive the rod down, pull up a few inches, and then inject the material through that. So yeah, lots of different products that are available, depending on what your contamination is and what your goals are. The two in these photos happen to be GAC, granular activated carbon, which sorbs the contamination and provides a good habitat for the bacteria to degrade it. And then vegetable oil can actually be used as a carbon source, and that's effective at solvent sites. You're trying to remove all the oxygen, all the other electron acceptors, and there's a small handful of bacteria that can use the chlorinated solvent as an electron acceptor and degrade it that way, but you can't give them any other choice. So that's, vegetable oil, molasses, and other materials. Soil vapor extraction, Brandon talked about this, and often compared with air sparge. So good at protecting buildings and removing soil. All right, monitoring. So again, it's highly dependent on your regulatory situation, but in general, if you've got groundwater contamination and you understand nature and extent, you're going to sample those wells once or twice a year. It may be a subset, you might not have to sample every well. And then typically for closeout, you're going to have to do quarterly sampling for period that maybe a year, maybe longer, just to confirm that the seasonal changes are not, that the contamination has been degraded. Soil vapor and indoor air are typically sampled during your worst case conditions, which if you don't know, anything else is gonna be wintertime. The soil's frozen, might have snow on there, and buildings tend to be sealed up better, or more, I should say, so that you're more likely to have that, vapors migrating into a building. And that's the photo is actually at preschool, so, you want to sample the breathing zone, and for adults, that's, like typically 4 to 5 feet on the floor. Kids, we put it kid level. And then confirmation sampling. So for soil contamination, you're typically, like if you excavate or do some other treatment of the soil, that confirmation sampling where you sample the sidewalls and the floor is typically adequate. And then you're most concerned frequently with the other media like groundwater or vapor. So you would actually do your closeout sampling with those media. So cost here, phase one, a little variable, but pretty defined, $5,000 to $8,000 is pretty typical. Phase two is highly dependent on what, how many samples you're looking for, what the analyte list is, some analyses are very expensive where others are not. And yeah, just your area that you're sampling. But 10 to 30,000 is, fairly typical. Also, if you've got to drill deep to groundwater, like 100 feet or something, that's probably going to be more than that. And remediation costs. So I got the Matchbox car and that Toyota Supra there, kind of pretty wide range, just depending on, your situation, but maybe a small UST site, you just got to dig out a small amount of soil and a whole tank. Maybe you can do that for 10,000 or less. Larger sites, hundreds of acres, industrial sites would be 10 plus million, but there's a huge range in there, obviously. And so your more typical, like corner gas station, dry cleaner type site, you may be able to do that for 20 to 100,000. Again, these are just complete guesses. You're going to have to look at your site in a lot more detail than that. Timeframes. So phase one is pretty simple and easy. Get that done in a couple of months typically. Phase twos may depend on seasonal conditions, driller availability, all that stuff. 3 to 6 months should be doable. The small simple sites of a year or less would be, again, just like soil contamination, something really, really defined. And then larger sites, long-term sites, typically more like a few years, possibly 10 plus years. And like Brandon said, that doesn't mean you can't redevelop that site or continue using it for whatever it is. It's, many of these technologies are built to be incorporated into the site use or not disturb the site use. So it's just definitely a cost consideration, but may not impact the use. So that's what I have. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, thanks for coming, everybody. My name is Mike Smith. I'm with WGen, and I'll be as brief as I can. I know we're running a little bit behind, so
Andrew talked about soil and groundwater. I'm gonna talk about vapors, soil vapors a little bit. Can you hear me? And I'll get right into it. We'll get it pretty fast. First, let's define what we're talking about. Vapor intrusion is the general term for the migration of volatile chemicals from the subsurface, from a subsurface vapor source and contaminated soil or groundwater through the soil into overlying buildings or structures. Volatile chemicals are substances that they easily evaporate or vaporize at standard temperatures and pressures, found in a variety of everyday products such as gasoline, paints, solvents, cleaning products, personal care products, and building materials. So these hazardous vapors can result in the subsurface from spills, leaks, improper disposal, or other releases to the environment, such as leaking underneath storage tanks or pipe. The chemicals then vaporize in the subsurface and migrate through the beta zone, and eventually migrate into the buildings through cracks in basements or foundations, as well as through conduits and other openings in the building envelope. Although the vapors can also migrate into structures that are not intended for human occupancy, like sewers and utility trenches or vaults and stuff like that. Obviously, once the vapors are present within an occupied structure, they pose a potential threat to human health, and to the occupant within the structure. I'll note now that when we're discussing vapor intrusion in our context, we do not talk about radon, even though the mitigation and the way that radon contamination occurs is very similar to vapor intrusion. We generally don't talk about that. It's end results, but we're generally talking about controlling the hazardous substances. And all types of buildings are susceptible to vapor intrusion, regardless of the kind of foundation you may have. If it's a slab on grade, if it's a basement, or even if it's a crawl space, all parts of the building and all types of buildings are susceptible to vapor intrusion. So how do we assess for vapor intrusion? Well, first thing we do is we want to know, actually, before I do that, I should say that the DEQ does have an excellent vapor intrusion guide. It goes into a lot more detail about vapor intrusion, how to assess for it, address it, stuff like that. And believe it or not, it's actually pretty easy to find on their website. Sorry about that, Jason. Vapor assessment. Okay, so the first vapor assessments require multiple lines of evidence that we take into consideration various conditions and characteristics of the site-specific situation that we have. We look at the characteristics of the potential contaminants, such as gasoline versus chlorinated solvents. We look at the proximity of the contamination to the structures, both vertically and horizontally. We look at soil types, groundwater conditions, building construction, and we have up here to worst case conditions. Worst case conditions is sort of, Andrew touched on them a little bit in the winter, for instance. You may have, your windows are going to be closed, so any vapors in the building don't have a chance to escape. So you may have your heating system on and windows closed, so that causes, could be a greater consequence. Restore.
Oh,
Do I need that?
yeah, let's look at it. That's okay, we're good on that.
Sorry about that, thank you. So the worst case conditions are potentially in Montana in the winter, like I said, windows closed and HVAC system operating. So we take all this information, we develop a conceptual site model to help us understand the situation, and then we fill in the gaps with assessment or sampling. We do this to evaluate whether there is a complete pathway that could pose a risk to human health. Typically, first type of samples that we're going to collect are soil gas, hopefully near or in proximity to the potential source of the contamination. These are simply samples of the soil gas beneath the ground, often at multiple depths and locations around and or near the potential contamination. There's some specific techniques to collect the soil samples. We'll go into those today. The vapor intrusion guide that I mentioned has excellent protocols for working, collecting those types of samples. So the results of the soil gas sampling, they help us determine if potential for vapor intrusion exists. They in and of themselves don't prove it, but they are one step in the process for determining whether we have a situation where vapor intrusion is occurring. After soil gas samples, the next one is sub-slab samples. And these are typically collected from beneath a slab on grade or beneath the basement. The term generally refers to vapors beneath the structure. Could also be looking at vapors within the crawl space, if there is a crawl space. And again, when we collect these, we get the results. They help us determine the potential for vapor intrusion. In and of themselves don't prove that you have a situation where it's occurring. Third type of vapor sample we can collect is indoor air. Indoor air samples tell us whether the contaminants of concern actually exist within the building and what concentrations. And again, not definitive, but another piece of filling in every part of the picture. For instance, there may be sources within the building that are contributing to the results, the concentrations that you're seeing in your indoor air samples. And then finally, the fourth kind is the outdoor air samples. Why do we collect outdoor air samples? We want to evaluate the potential for contaminants to enter the building from the outdoor air. This is possible if the contaminants are coming from outside and not through vapor intrusion and not indoor sources. Could be if you have a building with proximity to an intersection or vehicle traffic or industrial activity in or near your site, then you could be having intrusion from the outdoor environment in the building. So now we collect all the samples, we compare the levels of the concentrations that we've seen, and we go from soil gas, sub-slab, indoor, outdoor air samples, and we make a determination of the likelihood of vapor intrusion occurring. So what do we do if we have determined that vapor intrusion is in fact occurring? What do we do next? Well, we have our options of site remediation, institutional controls, and building controls. First, we'll look at site remediation. Brandon touched on this a little bit. I'll go into it a little bit more. This is acting at the source of the problem to remove and or reduce contaminants, concentrations in soil. This can be accomplished by direct removal, excavation, and removal disposal of the contaminated soil and or groundwater. That can be soil vapor extraction, in-situ bioremediation, or groundwater removal. Obviously, source removal is going to be your most effective method of addressing the issues that come with vapor intrusion, because you're removing the source and basically getting the problem out of the picture. Next, we have option we have the institutional controls. So this is most of the time, often source removal is not available or not possible. So we look at other options, and for one is institutional controls. So these are administrative and legal controls that limit the exposure to reduce the risk to the occupants of the building. These could include limiting or restricting access to the structures or to portions of the structures or to certain times to certain types of receptors. These are there are understandably drawbacks to institutional controls, most notably that the source remains in place, and also it can be difficult to enforce institutional controls often if they are the only method of treatment or addressing the vapor intrusion. But we can also use building controls. Building controls are the most common ways to address vapor intrusion. They're relatively simple. I mentioned earlier that vapor intrusion does not account for radon, but as Brandon said, the solutions are very similar. You might be familiar with radon mitigation systems that I'm sure you are. Sub-slab depressurization is also what Brandon touched on. And there's the same thing. A mechanical blower is used to create low pressure and sub-slab depressure, a BABA compliant mechanical blower, unless your project's over 250,000. I'm trying to Jen on speed dial, so I'm sorry. Passive slab venting is also similar to subslab depressurization, just without the mechanical blower. It's a method where vapors are directly vented to the atmosphere. Obviously, certain conditions have to be in place for that to be effective. And then vapor barriers are another means to address vapor intrusion. The barrier is usually only appropriate when there's access to the subslab. Vapor barriers are really effective if there's planned construction or new construction. So if you know that the potential for vapor intrusion exists, but you have plans to develop, you can put those vapor intrusion barriers in. They're very effective. And they're usually made of plastic or asphalt latex and impermeable substances. Quickly hop over to costs.
A little behind you, Mike, sorry.
Oh,
Subslab.
okay, here's our results. Our subslab mechanical blower, mechanical blower. Brandon touched on how that works. The advantage of the mechanical blower is it creates a low pressure below the slab, obviously, which not only prevents vapors from going in, but actually increases the instance of bioremediation if it's petroleum contaminant below the slab. There's some examples. The passive slab venting, or venting out of a sump area, so basically preventing the vapors from coming in, just going right out to the slab, and there's your vapor. Okay, costs. Obviously, the cost to assess any environmental situation vary greatly, as you've heard us all say up here, depending on size, location, the media involved, types of contamination, access, time of year, et cetera. So, if I was going to look at like a typical kind of project where a single, say it's a single building, petroleum contamination, and it's not, it's like I said, it's simple, hardly ever happens, but let's just do that for now. An assessment only cost would be probably in that $8 to $10, possibly $20,000 range. The lab costs are not terribly expensive for the media that we're looking at here for soil vapor. So, relatively speaking, it's not that expensive. Again, considering all the caveats I said before, every site is a site-specific site. There's always real life that happens. So, in a more complex site, those costs could creep up into the 5-figure range, $20 to $60 or even $100,000 in extreme cases, I would say. That's for assessment. Mitigation costs, as you can see on this slide, range for the building. The range for building controls is relatively speaking quite reasonable. If anybody's put a radon system in, like I said, they're very similar. Probably $4,000 to $8,000 for a project the size of a single family residence. Some of you may have those systems on your house already. And then obviously the passive barriers that we have up here are during construction, there's an added cost in the construction, a very low added costs for the factor safety you're going to get the insurance of being protected against vapor intrusion. And then for timing, again, all the same caveats that I said, existing, but on a simple type project, we can look at it. It's not a terribly long, drawn out process, 3 to 9 or 10 weeks, obviously assuming that you already got your eligibility and all that other stuff taken care of and addressed. So this is more for the implementation of assessment and getting your mitigation measures in place. So this is that simple project, not that long. And the bigger the project, the longer it's probably take you on. So, to recap, vapor intrusion is the mitigation of hazardous vapors into structures. We look for multiple lines of evidence to evaluate the potential for vapor intrusion, including assessing background sources and characteristics of the entire system. If it exists, there are options for mitigation, most commonly implemented building controls that we discussed. And finally, I said the technology is relatively simple, but as with any technology, we're always learning and there's always improvements in addressing this with new science and new technology. That's all I got. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you all for those really informative presentations. I know I learned a lot. We are going to take a quick break, but before we do that, Jennifer Wilbur had one more point of clarification to make. Jen, oh, there you are. You wanna come up? Yeah. I'm not,
I left out one really key point, because I forget that our election in particular is at least 5 years, so, there is, if your grant was awarded, sorry, let me get the hammer. If your grant was awarded before February 28th or on or before March 1st of 2023, any award before that does not have to comply with BABA. Your compliance is an adjustment period waiver. You just have to flag it, keep it in your grant files. Any new money added after that is subject to BABA. So the key date is March 1st, 2023. I know we're past that, but since some of your grants are actually longer, just letting you know. Second thing, I just heard back from Jim Drummond. He said for the RFP, you cannot rule out somebody because they don't have Brownfields experience. So when you write it, you can't say only Brownfields experienced people. Then I asked the question, so if you phrased it, please describe your experience in remediation, including Circle 104K or familiarity with Circle 104K, 128, effective rules, blah, blah, blah. Circle generally, whatever the NCP. Can you say that? And he said, yeah, that's fine. So Brownfields is okay. You can get specific. You just can't say only Brownfields, and you can't rule them out just because they don't have specific Brownfields. So does it make sense? Yes. Cool. Yes.
You said, if you start to get RL supplemental,
Yeah.
and that will bring in the bottom terms and conditions.
Yep.
And then the terms and conditions will apply to all money, right?
No. The terms and conditions only apply to the new money. So if you've got an RLF, only the new funding award after March, and I know that gets confusing if you mix funding, but if you can separate it, it only applies to the newly awarded funding. And to make this more confusing, if you run into a situation where you have a new award that is working on the same exact project, but it's a continuation, we can make an argument that the waiver still applies to that continuous project. It's just how you define the project. That is extremely rare, but it is possible. So just for those that have grants that are pre that date, if you're confused, just talk to me or email me or whatever, and we will give you a thumbs up, yes, you're good, and then you keep that in your grant file. So key piece, particularly for RLF, but even cleanup grants. So that's it. Thank you.
okay, so we are gonna take a break, running a little bit behind schedule, so let's plan to reconvene at 11:10, have a 10-minute break. And we will get into marketing your site for redevelopment.
I'm Sarah Strisson from Verify Development. I'm in Havre. And they asked me to speak kind of about marketing, Bradford sites for redevelopment. I'm going to speak more about rural redevelopment. A lot of times I go to conferences and they say, oh, this is a rural site. I'm like, well, that's cute. So I'm going to tell you for a quick minute why we're actually rural. And it's more about struggles of marketing our sites as opposed to like really innovative ways. So if that's not what you're hoping for, that's too bad. So this is just a quick overview of Veritas Brownfields program. We've had assessment grant funds since 2009 for a total of $2.3 million. And we've had RLF cleanup grants awarded since 2011. Started out for $1 million, 500,000 supplemental, and then we recently got 2.15 million in supplemental funding. So with those funds, we completed 93 sections and 17 cleanups, and we've got quite a few slated to continue as well. And then I wanted to give kind of an overview of our area. Our economic development district covers 5 counties in rural northern Montana. So just key points here, our land area is a little over 17,000 square miles. Our population is only 35,000. So that is roughly about 2 people per square mile. So we definitely have more cows than we do people. And then our per capita income is significantly less than the state and national average. So that kind of factors into a lot of redevelopment as well. I didn't put it in here, but I was recently at the Montana Main Street Conference, and I was surprised to learn that in these rural areas, entrepreneurship is actually significantly higher than it is in the urban areas, so kind of a cool thing as well that we can factor in. So this is just a brief snapshot of the area that we serve. So we do have some hurdles to redevelopment in our area. Excuse me. The biggest one is definitely money. So sometimes the cost of cleanup of a site is more than the actual value of the site. And that can deter a lot of people from moving forward with anything. And as I showed in the previous slide, we have lower economic prosperity in a lot of our counties that we serve. Location, I blame Kevin Costner. We are not the postcard part of Montana that most people want to go to. So if you're looking for Yellowstone or Glacier, it's just not where we're at. I think it's pretty, but other people, not so much. And then a lot of our rural communities are isolated. So a lot of new development doesn't really want to come there. So we really have to bring them in and find ways to attract them. Infrastructure is huge. A lot of our rural communities, the infrastructure is so aging and falling apart. We've got water line breaks constantly. We've got a really robust community development department at Dilapidated Development. And they did so many great things with the ARPA funds that came through. It only went so far. So we weren't able to overhaul all of the infrastructure in all of our communities. And it's definitely, people don't want to buy a property or invest in something if they have to overhaul all of the infrastructure that's there as well. So some of the marketing strategies that we do use when we try to bring in a brownfield site, local connections is definitely huge. Elected officials, I'm in kind of a unique situation. My boss is an elected official, so if he doesn't agree with me, he has to find another personality hire. And my husband is an elected official, so he's legally obligated to support all of my professional endeavors. Realtors are huge. That's a huge, that's a connection that we can definitely make. And then a lot of our redevelopment is current businesses that are looking to expand or relocate for various reasons. Fact sheets, I'll have an example of one of those. They're cheap, they're pretty to look at, and they're pretty easy to hand out. Social media, if you have a younger millennial employee, as we do, it's free. So definitely, it's not me, I don't think, but she's pretty good. And we can set the narrative. We can really direct the tone on how we market these sites. And then it gives us, like I said, the front row seat input from the public. So able to get the comments, able to like get the feedback from people on what they're hoping to see. And then local news. Newspapers huge in rural Montana. They still use newspapers. They still get a lot of their information from that. So we use that quite a bit. And then radio. We do a lot of radio interviews. We use that as a way to just kind of inform people on projects that are happening, kind of set the narrative and start conversation about brownfields. And it does spur additional projects later on. So just a few examples of projects up in northern Montana, and I can give examples of what we did to market it. Chester Motors is a former, what's that? It's like a dealership and a shop of sorts back in the day. So it had pretty significant petroleum contamination, but it was not Petro Fund eligible. So the local agricultural business in Chester wanted to purchase it to grow their seed business or something. I don't know, I'm very farmer, but I don't know anything about it. But they couldn't because of the petroleum contamination. And the cleanup cost was probably about 3 times more than the property was worth. So didn't really incentivize the owners to do a lot of cleanup. We were able to supplement it with the DNRC Reclamation and Development Grant. And it turned, we were able to turn down the portion that the owners had to contribute to $20,000 because of that grant. Huge. We're going to add, I think, 15 jobs to Chester, which I think there's 23 people in Chester. No, there's not, but so it's going to be really, really big for the area, and we're going to be able to clean it up. We used a lot of our annual reports, social media, things like that to push out this site. But this is a good example of an existing business that wanted to expand, and we were able to use that. The Big Sandy Hotel
It looks really cool on the outside, but on the inside, it's horrifying. And it's beyond repair. So we've had a few people that wanted to turn it into apartments, and then they step foot into it, and they're like, no, thank you, I want nothing to do with this. So the town was able to acquire it. Finally, there was some back and forth and everything. And they're gonna tear it down. And this is one where we did reach out to the local community, and we were able to talk to the local grocery store because Big Sandy is a food desert. So you're so far removed from the nearest grocery store, and they are going to use some grant funds and things like that, I think from USDA, to expand their grocery store and relocate at the site where the Big Sandy Hotel is. So that's gonna bring a lot more food options to Big Sandy. And one of the cool things that we were able to talk to, and this conversation came up because somebody reached out to me when they heard about this project, because we had it on social media and we had it in the newspaper. And they said, I want the hotel sign on the outside because it's kind of a cool old neon sign. So the town is actually gonna auction it off to raise funds for this project, which I thought that was kind of a cool way to do it. So that'll also bring attention to the project as well. The Gilbert property is one, it was another gas station and repair shop. It's on the east side of Havre, which if anybody's been to Havre, the commercial business on the east side has been dwindling for probably about 20-25 years. And it's a priority of Havre to try to drive commercial business to that side of town. It has been for quite a while. So this one, the owner acquired it from his family who owned the dealership. And we were able to clean it up using RLF funds, significant reimbursement from Petro Fund on this. So I think it's around 130,000 so far for the cleanup. And with the RLF loan that the owner took out, he's gonna be on the hook for 23,000. So Petro Fund is a huge driver for us to redevelop these sites. He had some interest for a dental office that was gonna open there. That kind of fell through, but right now he's got it listed and he's kind of entertaining ideas. And he got really into the Brownfields program. So he is only gonna sell it to somebody who has a really good idea of what they want to do with it, which I think is kind of cool. Larry's kind of our cheerleader for Brownfields. So that's a really good one. And we're working pretty closely with the city on that because we want to try to get some commercial business out there. So if people are coming in for permits or people are coming in to try to look into that, we're encouraging them to purchase this land. And this is another good example of the hurdle we have because this cleanup without Petro Fund wouldn't have happened. The cost of the cleanup is just so much more than the property is good. And then I wanted to give an example of one that failed because it's a truth and that happens. So four-way fuel is also in Big Sandy. It's right along Highway 87. And there was a building there and there was petroleum contamination. So we had effective abatement and petroleum. We used our RLF program and it was Petro Fund reimbursable. We had these huge redevelopment plans. We were going to make it a visitor area because there's the Missouri Breaks National Monument around there. And we were going to kind of direct people to where to go. In the middle of this project, there was an election and the new county commissioner that came in said, no, thank you. I am not interested in doing this in any way, shape or form. So we have plans, but they are not going to be pursued anytime soon. And that's kind of something that happens that we have to deal with. Sometimes we lose our cheerleader and we have to try to come up with different ways to do it. This was one that we really featured heavily in our annual reports, our newsletters, our social media. It was very visible. That's kind of a key thing in rural Montana too. If the project is visible, people are going to talk about it. So since this was right along Highway 87, it usually waits until the work is actually being done. So once the dirt was being dug up, that's when you heard a lot of the conversation of, what's going on? What are they doing all this and what have you? And we were able to inform the public through those different channels. So this is one where we're going to revisit it. We're going to use whatever marketing strategies we have to try to get some sort of redevelopment there. The county currently owns it, so we're going to have to find an option for redevelopment that is free and or cheap. So that's what they're really looking for. This is an example of a fact sheet that we use. It's helpful, you can have all the information about the site. It's really great when you have to work with towns or counties because you can kind of give it to them and it's a snapshot of what they have. You can factor the cost of making these into your grant, or if you have a Canva account, I made that in 20 minutes. So, they're not difficult. All of the information is available through the assessment work that you do. And sometimes that can be helpful for realtors, for people who want more information on the current status of the site before they kind of commit to any redevelopment. So they're something that you can do as well. Gosh, I did that really quickly. I'm sorry. No, you're good. Questions, comments, concerns, compliments, anything? I was caught up. You're welcome. Yeah.
How did you know to approach the grocery store?
What's that?
How did you know to approach the grocery store, or did you just knock on every business?
So he asked, how did we know to approach the grocery store? In my role, so I'm the director of community planning and brownfields. I don't just do brownfields. So I do a lot of the demographic and a lot of data information for our area. And I know that Big Sandy's a food desert. So I did work with the town and they knew that the grocery store was limited and we kind of talked about that and everything. So it was more of the town than it was me to approach the grocery store, but it was a collaboration and it was an opportunity and they were able to find a lot of these disadvantaged communities are more apt to get funding than a lot of the urban areas. I say that with like, it's still difficult, but you can find ways to do things like that to expand, so. Yeah.
Is that kind of position still elected?
He is a delightful human being and I like him very much. And I don't say that to be mean to him or anything, he's on our board, so. But he just, it was one of those, and I don't blame him, you know, he's an old rancher and he looked at the project and he was like, that's not a priority for me, and it was gonna cost them a little bit of money to contribute, and that was kind of the deterring factor. So until I find out a way to make it free, he's just not wanting to pursue it.
I think one of the angles is revitalization of tax base, gives him that money for having these permits.
Yes, and on an offshoot, Bear Paw Development did just get a tourism grant from Havers, so we're getting a lot of data on the money that tourism brings into our local economies, so I'm hoping that we can maybe start this narrative again with the Choteau County Commissioners. And to be fair, in their defense, it was the height of ARPA. They had their hands full. It was just not something that they, you know, I'm not hating on the Choteau County Commissioners, I understand where they're coming from. But it's one that we want to revisit, we just haven't done it. Perfect. Okay, so.
Thank you. Okay, so we were going to have an exercise, but because of time constraints, we are going to skip it. But I have placed these worksheets. It's funny, Sarah, I made this little marketing like example sheet in Canva, and then I looked at your presentation and I was like, I need to use the same template as me. So that's funny. Big shout out to Canva. You can get a free trial, and that is helpful because it's kind of annoying to use without.
Don't tell my boss which kind of raise them. Right there.
So this is also uploaded to the webpage as a resource for folks who would like to kind of play around with it. So on one side, we have just a breakdown of kind of some typical information to include on a marketing fact sheet. And then on the back side, what we were going to do with this 30 minutes is to have you kind of start thinking about filling out some of that information for your own site. But because of that, we'll just have you take it home and kind of have it as a resource. And again, it's on the website if you want a blank version. This would be super easy to recreate in Word or PowerPoint or whatever the Microsoft alternative to InDesign is. So yeah, just a resource there. We will move on to talking to your elected officials about brownfields. So that'll be Jason and his team of misfits. If I can get representatives from WGM, Tetra Tech and Fields to meet me in the back. We are going to go pick up lunch. Maggie, any other announcements?
No, not that I can think of.
Okay.
I think I'm gonna do a quick little intro and then I'll close it. So we can-
Okay, and online folks, I think we're setting up real quick for a little panel, so stay tuned. Oh,
I think we're
we're
ready.
set up.
Ready. So come on, have a seat, please. So, I'm gonna give a real quick introduction to this topic, but the idea is to have kind of an open conversation amongst friends, and coworkers and colleagues. And, but we also want you guys to be part of this conversation. So the session I mean, the topic is about engaging decision makers.
I have to do that.
And so I've asked, our colleagues, Representative Paul Tuss, who's the Executive Director of Bear Paw, our, Economic Development, and Brian Obert, who's the Executive Director of MBAC, who've been part of MEDA forever and working kind of with decision makers as well as being a decision maker or deciding to become a decision maker. So this is the panel, but just to give a background, we're gonna kind of give a quick update on bipartisan infrastructure law funding. We're gonna have this engaging discussion, and then we'll talk about potential next steps. So bipartisan infrastructure law, November 2021, we kind of heard that it's coming, and it's coming right for us, and it was like for us in DEQ, right around November, we had to do our normal funding that pays my time and our time, but then we had this opportunity to go after additional bill funds for supplemental that we can use towards cleanup. And then at the same time, they also announced that, oh, by the way, states can actually apply for this assessment grant that can help kind of backfill or fill in the gaps of what you guys didn't have at that time. I think at that time, Bear Paw's grant was kind of winding down, and so we kind of backfilled with our grant. And so we applied for all three, and it was, I can just, the owl is taking here.
Up there.
Okay. All right, so, and so we had to kind of fast and furiously apply for all of them. And, in October 2022, we got all three of them, and it was kind of overwhelming, and we did feel a little bit like the tsunami was here and it was kind of taking over. But you look in the far distance, you'll see your friendly neighborhood Brownfields coordinator kind of riding that wave. Because that's what we do in Brownfields, right? We kind of just take advantage of the situation in it. Sometimes it looks a little hairy, and the questions are we going to be able to pull through this? But in the end, we were able to pull through, and we were able to do a lot of great things. So riding that wave, but what did it actually look like as far as monetary goes? So 2021, the nation's 128A program, which is what funds my staff and my program, was around just under 50 million. 104K grants were just under 100 million, so about 150 between everybody. 2022 comes, Bill, there's that wave. Now we have almost 400 million in funding. So it's kind of going, we're riding that wave. We had tsunamis hit, but we're riding that wave. And there we are, 2024, just applied. Everybody's just finished last week. We're all breathing a sigh of relief. Just finished our grants. But the question is, what happens in 2027? Because right now, we're all going to return back to the way we were in 2021. And that's, right now, we've been used to riding that wave, and we've been doing a lot of great things, but what can we do to maybe fix the solution? And usually when we come up with a solution, it's like, what do we do? What do we do? Instead of just kind of retreating and giving up, I'd rather try to speed up and hit the jump and keep it going. And so that's why we're here. We want to see what we can do to maybe not just go back to normal or back where we were, and what can we do to maybe continue this ride. So I think together we can do it. And right now I'd like to kind of start the discussion with Representative Paul Tuss and Brian over. So I'll start off with the first question. How, as a statewide representative, what's the best method for us in the Brownfield world to engage with state officials?
Should I use this?
Yes.
I thought about this on the way down here, and I think the answer is, it's the same answer to the question, when we first, at least in our organization, got Brownfield funds, how do we sell this to local officials, right? I mean, they're used to it now, we've been doing this for 15 years. But I can remember the first time that we got Brownfield, it was like, holy hell, you know, there was this notion that the federal government's gonna swoop in. It's associated with the EPA.
Right.
So go to rural Golden, Montana and say EPA. And you know what the response is gonna be. So I don't think it's any different now in terms of selling this to state officials. I think we need to think about what's the sex appeal? What's the sex appeal of this particular program? And it's jobs, right? It's the economy. It's taking dilapidated buildings in downtown Tampa, Big Sandy, and making grocery stores. It's expanding the economy. It's expanding the tax base. I can remember when we first got our first Brownfields assessment grant. I walked into the dry cleaners. Well, you probably know what this is doing, right? A dry cleaners literally has been in the same position for 150 years now, right? Northern Montana. I walked in and the owner saw me bringing in my shirts. He immediately came out because we had just done a flashy press release on this money. And he's like, oh my goodness, you're gonna tank. You're gonna come in and you're gonna discover these solvents that we haven't been using in 35 years, but they used them back in the day. We're done. And so there was a huge education curve. And now it's universally accepted. It's a very good program, right? Both with the business community and local elected officials. And I think at the statewide level, I think that's what we need to do. Focus on the positive aspects of what we're doing, the fun that goes together. And I think that's what we're saying.
So I think the key here is to remember, every place is a little bit different. The one thing I will first say that you said something about that, that it's you didn't use the word sexy, did you?
Sex appeal.
Sex appeal, that was it. How do we turn dirty old gas stations into a sexy sex appeal type location? Paul said jobs and the economy. I'm in Helena, Townsend, White Sulphur. If I have more jobs, that means I have more people. I have more people, I'm gonna have more pressure on my housing and on my childcare. And right now, my county commissioners don't want the jobs, they want the taxable value. That's what they wanted. They want to, how can they be able to continue to run their sheriff's department? So I think we need to be thinking about the sweet spot with our local officials, which also include people like Paul being a legislator. What is it that they want to hear about? And then how do we change our story to talk to that? Taxable value, and I think the point about being scary, I mean, I'm manager, oversee East Helena, lead smelter Superfund site. So obviously EPA is very terrifying here,
but we've done good things, and I think the one thing that we have wanted to do, and I know Everett has done it, Lewistown has done it, be really good at your job, get a lot of shit done for not a lot of money, and make it visible to the general public. That's going to be how we make things happen. Again, outputs, outcomes, and then how does it kind of scratch their itch will be something we need to do, and a lot of storytelling, demystification and storytelling. So we have local legislators, we've got some changes at the federal government, the Chevron decision has come through. All of this is disrupting a lot of perceptions on how we redevelop. We need to be very nimble because I think they're going to be very small but unique opportunities to be able to take advantage of those different things. I think locally the Chevron decision will move some of the more contaminated and more complex sites. Probably doesn't affect a lot of other things, but I think there's a redevelopment opportunity there. And what we need to be careful of is that at the federal level, they don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. My first experience in Brownfield, I actually had a site that had went to enforcement. And oh my God, I didn't understand how difficult something that hit the attorneys at DEQ became. So how do we understand that action point and when we can actually get something done and where we may want to kind of backstep and make sure we just kind of let time solve some of this? Is that helpful?
Can I say one more thing here? I didn't know you could swear here. And you said that shit fine. I think that's really important because oftentimes these programs are administered locally by economic development organizations. And I know before I was a legislator, when I went to the legislature and asked for funding for programs, oftentimes it was like us with a little copper cow. You know, please certainly have money. And we're feathering on next. We're going to add additional administration. We're going to add 3 more employees, those type of things. So I really want to underscore things. I think getting things done is going to be incredibly important to any future success that we have in this, and honestly, other programs will take it.
Yes, absolutely, 100%. Because I think we all are getting things done, and that's what one Brownfields does, is it focuses on. It's the redevelopment. That's the key driver. As an elected official, what is it? How is it best for us to share information with you? Is it through great-looking fact sheets that your staff create on campus? Is it postcards? Really great postcards that we send out to all of our elected officials saying, thank you for supporting the Brownfields. We've been doing great things. Is it story maps? Is it short videos? Is it on YouTube? Is it TikTok? Is it Facebook? Or just personal letters, phone calls? What's the best way to kind of engage you or engage others?
I think the answer is obvious, and I think everybody knows it's all of you, right? One work story, one of my colleagues who is an 83-year-old legislator, who doesn't know himself, how do we communicate with him is going to be significantly different than the 18-year-old just got like passed. So it's really all of the above. But if I had to pick one, if I had to say, what is one thing that I would do in terms of, garnering support for this particular program with local elected officials? We've done this a couple times in the Marathon region, and there were all moments, and that's to tour the projects, right? It's one thing to see things one-dimensional or two-dimensional, to look at a picture, or read a newsletter, or get a postcard. But get a van or two and put your local legislators or maybe your local elected officials to say, do you guys remember when the shortstop was vacant for 17 years because there was petroleum contamination? And now we have a real estate office in here. Wait, let's go in and talk to the manager. Let's go in and talk to the owner of the real estate. So it's all set up ahead of time, right? He knows we're coming. And we walked in and there's this beautiful office that used to be a C-store, a convenience store, downtown Maverick. that was vacant and had a huge petroleum spill. And all of a sudden, they got rid of it. All of a sudden, they do remember that in 2006, they went by that place 6 times a day, and it was deteriorating. It was awful, there were broken windows, and now it's a gorgeous facility. So if I had a one strategy, you know, take them to an actual tour, a real tour, and spend half a day buying lunch, doing half a day tour of some of the better projects in a particular region or in the year.
I'm not an elected official. I know, but there we go. Now, my wife was elected as county commissioner for 12 years, so I slept with an elected official. So
You were so saucy today.
I am a little bit. I think what Paul was saying, the tours are great. The other thing, I kind of pulled it out. Anytime and every time, take a photo of anything and everything, the ugly, the nasty, the everything else. Because at some point in the very near future or not so near future, you're going to have something that's much different because you cleaned it up. My first project, the reason why I got into this was 2 projects, old gas stations, Kathy Bailey. I met her the first time in the Petro board meetings and decided, you know, we need to partner together and now have our coalition. Old nasty gas stations, one of them, the county was kind of owner to, but not quite. The other one was a defunct gas station that was in enforcement. We have old photos because I've been around not as long as Paul because he's old and I'm not. But we have photos from 15 years ago when we started to what we have today. To Paul's point, it really is about the compare and contrast and building respect within your community that you know what you're talking about. And I think that's the one thing that I would suggest to everybody. You have a lot of professionals in here who are in the field, they work for all of our environmental firms, and they have a habit of telling you of how bad it can be. That's very terrifying to our public officials. We, as some of the practitioners, one of the things that I would suggest is that we get as much history as we can about the site, maybe not the contamination about the site and make it personal, because then you can help to influence these politicians because you come across as knowing more than they do. And they think they know everything, but you know certain things more than they do. I'll kind of throw one out here. Greg just got to see something with us. We're talking about a site I wanted to do a phase 1, phase 2. I knew the site personally because I had lived near it. I knew as much as I can about the site, and I knew that would help to influence, first of all, EPA, and then my local county commissioner, who is now fairly new, not familiar with it. He came to me because I knew more about the history, or at least made it up, than he did. And that made him he stepped back and understood, okay, you're a professional who knows what's going on. And then we brought Brandon in, and Brandon scares them a little bit, but he looks to me and he says, well, you kind of know what you're doing, and you keep telling me that this is okay. So again, I think that's something we need to do with our elected officials. We know more than they do in certain areas. And how do we respond to them and let them know that we're going to make it better and make them look good, better? And that comes down to a lot of photos, a lot of storytelling.
So I love the idea of doing tours. That's something that we have done. And I think we should be doing more of, and specifically bringing in state groups of representatives. I think that's a great idea. If there are sites in your area, say you weren't as familiar with Brownfields as you obviously are, but if you're in another district or another region, how often would you like to be updated on these sites? Without being annoying, we don't want to be annoying, we don't want to waste anybody's time, but should we be actively, how actively engaging should we be?
My sense is that you have to do it for 2 years, and I say that simply based on the legislative cycle, right? 1/3 of the legislature turns over every 2 years, whether it's for retirements or term limits, or somebody passes away, or they get beat. So I think every 2 years is a great cycle, because Right now, there's a lot of information sharing and communication sharing with legislators that are gonna be starting their new jobs, or full jobs, on January 6th of this year. And if you did this 2 years ago, you need to refresh it, especially if you know that you're gonna have something for them in the legislature this coming session. So my sense, if we're talking specifically about state elected officials, I think it's 2 years out.
I think that's very good point, at least in Montana, with what we do. And then the 2-year cycle, I'll use an example of one of my local house members for many years. We go to the chamber dinners every year, and every other year he would show up because it was the election year and he was running for it. So that was the time. So it was literally 9 months, 11 months before the election, he would show up. That was the time that you needed to influence him and talk about the why we do what we do. So the timing is for us, for state funding and state influence, is every other year, and then it needs to be not as we get close to the election or just after the election in this weird cycle between November and January. It needs to be before that, when we can actually remind them, and I think the tours are great, remind them and then show why the local community embraces these champion projects that move the dial.
That's a great point. Get us before the election, because we're still out there stuffing votes, right? We're gonna be a little more attentive, I think, prior to the election. And also right now, in this phase between November and January, we're up here. We really are. The legislative council wants to meet with us. Every lobbying group in the state of Montana wants to tap you on the shoulder, take it out every time. So I think if you can do it prior to the election, that's a great thing.
Yeah, that was gonna be my question, is like when, between these 2 years, so that's great. So if, one of the things that I didn't mention during the slides, for EPA, I think especially for the 128 program, which is what funds states, I think the intention of that 128 program has always been kind of seed money a little bit, if you will. And the idea is that if then you develop your program, you show the value of your program, and then your state starts potentially funding into that program and growing a state-funded brownfields program. Is that something, and not this session, I'm not gonna put that on right now, but is that something that we should strive for? I work with states across the country from various, like obviously New Jersey, Massachusetts, California have their own state funding brownfields, but I just attended a session this past October that Tennessee, very red Tennessee, got a state funded brownfields program. And I was like, wow, how did you do that? And so I'll start with, is that even possible? And then we'll go into the potential hows.
This is my big review. I've been thinking about this a lot and didn't know exactly how this session was gonna go, but I knew that was gonna be one of the questions. And the obvious answer to that question is, yeah, the legislature should invest in the state funded brownfield, right? We've been saying that for 15 years. Wouldn't it be nice if the state of Montana put this in their budget? And it dawned on me, I'm a legislator, right? So I might be able to have some impact on this. And so as a legislator, I have unlimited amount of bill draft requests through December 5th. And I have every legislator going into the session has 5 bill draft requests. One of those bill draft requests would be the creation of a state funded brownfield program. Just my review this, and I think we've got a track record of success. We can point to projects from stem to stern in the state that are very, very successful. The politics, in my opinion, of this legislature is going to be a little better than it was last session. You had a super majority. It's very partisan. I think it's gonna be a little bit better. We're also in a financial position to do something like this. Not in a financial position that we were 2 years ago. 2 years ago, $2.5, $2.6 billion surplus. But this year, we're gonna have $1 billion surplus probably, and I don't know exactly what that's gonna look like, but that's building with three. That's a lot of money. And so what if we proposed a state funded brownfield program through this legislature? Probably have to be a pilot program because we have to make sure it works and then come back perhaps some permanent funding later on. But I'm going to probably drop this either tonight or tomorrow. So I would let the folks in this room what's happening with that particular piece of legislation, and we'll obviously have to show up at the legislature here in help when that particular bill winds its way through the process.
I don't even know where to go after that. So, I think one of the things that we need to be thinking about in that is now what my reading the tea leaves right now is there's been what appears a pretty substantial fight between the states, whether it's the governor, the legislators in our local cities and counties. I think that's something that we can show movement and getting things done on the ground at the local level. We need to make sure that moves forward at the legislative and the governor level. Also, what's good at the local level is good for them. And it feels like the last session, which was very contentious, that was part of the conversation to bring forward. I am very hopeful that this session is a little less. I think there will be some sharp elbows thrown early, but hopefully that will move into, but how do we move the dial, move the puck on the ground or on the ice? And I think everybody in the end, it's local. So every time we can show a program and why it made an improvement, what is sexier about today than it was yesterday, it potentially can make this happen. I think everybody wants to be result oriented right now. We get results done. So I think this is a way we can amplify this type of legislation.
So, thank you. That's amazing. So that was beyond what I was hoping for. I was thinking next session. There's no way this. But if you're willing, I think the question as a group, as a whole, and this is what transpired in Tennessee. Tennessee, they decided, it's like, what is the need? Or what is the greatest need of the state right now? And at that time in Tennessee, they said, all of our cities are growing, all of our rural amenities are being swallowed up. We need a conservation fund, call it a conservation fund. And the idea is it's conservation in that it's promoting brownfields so that it's limiting sprawl. And so those natural resources are protected. In Montana right now, you mentioned jobs. Brian mentioned taxable value of property. Is Montana's need, and we can talk about this collectively, is it housing? Do we hang, what hook do you hang this brownfields on? Is it housing? Is it jobs? Is it economy? Is it, what are your thoughts?
Well, again, I'm going to go back to my earlier, this would be an earlier question. I think it's all of the above. We want Montana to be as successful as we possibly be. We do need more housing. We also need an expanded tax base. Right? We want small businesses to start up, not just in Montana, but statewide. So I think it's really all of the above. I think the key to success, and I'm going to look at everybody who's saying what I just said, because because I don't think I'm stranger. So, anyone with DEQ is looking at this going, oh, it's coming. Just thanks for the, thanks for the heads up. But I think in terms of success, and this is getting on top, we do need to have a serious conversation with the administration, with the department saying, hey, this is wonderful. I don't think there's a lot of legislation. We have a whole bunch of folks throughout this statewide. This could really move the needle. So I think one of the early partners that we need to get on board is obviously the administration, and then we can work on politics and food bringing to testify, et cetera, et cetera.
Jumping off that, for much of the state, it is probably all of the above. For portions of, and those from Montana, I mean, the idea of the old boots, I mean, the Kalispell, Missoula, Butte, Helena, Bozeman, Billings, it's housing right now. Infrastructure, how do we do infill housing and anything that can drive down the cost of housing, the cost of rent, these things. My gut right now is probably a real ripening point, at least in those portions of the state. I do think to a certain degree in rural areas, when it comes to apartments, fourplexes, sixplexes, something larger, we haven't built any of those probably since the 60s and 70s. Those facilities are aged, probably have a certain amount of asbestos, lead-based paint, things like that in it. My gut right now is we can take a housing lien on a lot of this. There's a lot of people looking for answers. There aren't any easy answers right now because interest rates appear to be going up right now for home loans. So my gut is telling me we're not going to see a lot of movement. We're in a band or a range for interest rates. So that's going to make it harder for traditional economic drivers of the private market to move the housing market, especially downward. I think infill reutilization of underutilized buildings, I think in a housing mechanism probably is the sweetest or easiest spot to get some traction.
Let me just say one thing during this session, and I can appreciate your cautionary about, maybe I was thinking about putting in next session. We might not get this done. I mean, one of the first pieces of good advice I got last year as a freshman representative is don't get too attached to your legislation. We usually devastated when it gets killed, or devastated when the state gets vetoed. So, but what you do is you lay the ground, right? And that's what happens with a lot of programs statewide, but certainly a lot of them within the economic development is you have the authorization in this session. And 4 sessions from there, you got the funding. So we shouldn't lose faith or hope if it doesn't happen this session. But let's plan our flight in terms of this is important for Montana, and maybe we'll get done.
I know we're actually, so kind of a preview later today after lunch, we're going to be talking about the West Virginia Brown Bad Buildings Program. And what they did there was actually, their focus was on kind of, Brian always calls the buck teeth or the gaps in the teeth in your downtown communities. It's that rotten building, and believe it or not, in West Virginia, they have a lot of them. And as most of you guys know, in the Brownfields world, generally demolition is not covered in your cleanup costs. And so what they did is they created these inventories all across West Virginia, took those to their legislators and said, this is the demand. Like, we have so much demand, and then the legislators responded to that. Is there something that we can do here to kind of help show the demand for this state funded program?
Yeah, I think, well, there's a lot of ways to show demand, but one of the things how we perhaps devise the specifics of what this legislation is where are the gaps in the federal program doesn't do. And I think that's what you're talking about, right? Demolition, is that a gap? So we specifically put in the legislation for Montana benefits program definition, it's there. Right? So in addition to selling this as a great economic development tool or a great tool for housing, whatever it happens to be, what parts of the current federal program that we use every single day, but if it just was tweaked, boy, it would be a much more user-friendly program if the buy is one term, 3 clicks to the right or to the left. So I think with our collective wisdom about the federal program, let's make this part of this one with Montana for someone's guarantee.
Yeah, that's all good stuff. I think the other thing we need to be thinking about is this context of public good. Why state funds for this? Doing a lot of technical and finance work. I mean, arguments right now about facade improvements. Why is the taxpayers doing an improvement to a private building? Those upkeep that derelict lot in the middle of a maybe not vibrant but an active block. Why isn't the existing landowner doing something? So I think the conversation about how do we either create an incentive for the next person, again, you talk to locals who aren't city elected officials and they say, well, there should be a blight tax. The word tax is not a 4-letter word, but right now it is. So how do we start figuring out that language about why the use of state funds for a private piece of property? I do think we have some momentum. The Department of Commerce has had some new money that they've been pushing out that are very select in market segments. We have our meat and poultry processing money. We have now a Big Sky Trust Fund growth funds that they're kind of suggesting they want it towards manufacturing and automation. How do we do this? How do we gain some language around it that people understand why we use state funds in a private setting?
We could talk about this all day. But you bring up some really good points, and how do we juxtapose something like proposing in terms of state dollars going into brownfield when you're competing against an absolutely heroic education system, right? Against pre-K funding, those locally inadequate, against all the other priorities that the public, what we traditionally do in the public. And now this is something that, and it's got that little private spin on it. And so that's a really good point. We're gonna have to strategize very carefully about what our message is to legislators that are funding public things, and then you have this kind of private component to it that go, shouldn't private sector be doing that? And they're the ones that cause the lead-based paint to form. They're the ones that cause the contamination because of petroleum leaks or whatever. So that's really important as we want to go through this process.
So I wanted to have this as a bigger conversation. So does anybody else have any thoughts or questions on, or you say it out loud and we'll repeat it for those that are online.
Sure, Jennifer Wilson with EPA. I'm gonna put my last hat on with the budget director for all of the land and emergency fund office. When Bill passed, getting that 128 funding is actually difficult. But this is first-hand experience, that way. We got it in. You had a chart that says goes out to 27. That funding is awarded each year. Funding is not guaranteed. We do not know what is going to happen. The first thing that the administration will cut, Congress will cut something that hasn't been awarded yet. You already got it, that's great. The last iteration of the incoming administration, they went after things that weren't awarded, they rescinded funding, Congress, give it to Congress, take it away. Second thing they went after, what programs should the states be doing that we can disavow ourselves of? All out there, I'm not saying anything that's not public. So I leave that to you guys to make your argument. They're very good ones. think about what you've done with the extra money you got. If the federal money goes away, and I'm not lobbying, I'm not lobbying. Can you sustain that work? What have you been able to do at that level? Use that as a benchmark, just the consideration. And then as you have your conversations with your state legislatures, you are within your rights to have the same conversation with your federal counterparts that say the value of the work that has been done. So I just need that for all of you to consider. That's it.
Yeah, so the quick summary for those online, I think the message was that as far as the federal level, for this bill funding, it was five-year window, 5-year program. And with it, we were able to, as a state, we were able to hire an extra individual because all the money that you guys as grantees got, we have to help manage those sites as well. Like we have to review the SAPs, we have to review the reports. So that's how we justified, okay, we need to increase that funding as well. But that's always the first thing that's given is the first thing that's taken. And so the idea was we need to recognize that if that is the first thing on the chopping block, how can we add that to potentially this legislation?
Yeah, actually, I'd actually like to speak to that. I mean, again, because Paul's much older than me, he's done this before. I sit on I'm one of the executive directors of the statewide Montana Economic Developers Association. Our executive meeting on Monday specifically was starting to address that. Openly talking to the firm that we hired to be our executive director. He brought up the Chevron Act. Boy, we're going to move everything for our Chevron decision. This is going to move everything forward. Colstrip's going to be all hunky-dory and fine going forward. We then had to remind him that this room, our organizations do a lot of very good work using EPA brownfield. And you could just see the light hit him that, oh yeah, there's the baby in the bathwater. Here's a great program that moves the dial on the ground that nobody in DC really understands. His comment to that, what we're now starting to actually implement is the head of the Senate is Mr. Thune. We've got North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, very well involved. A lot of the leadership in the Senate has now moved further north. We are going to be openly speaking to our counterparts in those states about brownfields specifically, about how this moves the dial in Sunburst, Montana, in Lincoln, Montana, in these towns of 35 that are actually bigger than that. But we've got to get much sharper on our conversation about why. And I swore earlier, I'll come right back to it. We get shit done. And there's a lot of complaints, which probably reflected in the election about a lot of money moving around that the general public doesn't understand the outcomes of because it takes years for that to happen. We, as organizations, we as brownfield people have been moving that dial in a really creative manner at the local level. We need to start yelling from the mountaintops because if we don't, I mean, the baby's out with the bathwater. And so you're going to have programs, whether it's EPA and brownfield or others. We need to get better with our storytelling about how efficient we are with the minimal funds that we get. We just have to get better at that.
We also have to remember, and I don't know if today's political environment is so gloomy than what we look at in the past isn't relevant. But prior to the most recent federal investment of significance in brownfields, the past largest investment in brownfields came down during the George W. Bush administration. And that's awesome, right? This is not a partisan program, nor should it ever be considered a partisan program. And traditionally, on Capitol Hill in DC, we've had just as good of support from opponents as we have Democrats. Now, I don't know if under Project 2025, if that's even real. If this is on the chopping block, I tried to look for it the other day, I couldn't find it, so that's good. You said it's not, that's wonderful. So I think we need to, in our advocacy efforts, both state and federal level, always emphasize the fact that this is absolutely nonpartisan, bipartisan effort to help with housing, to help with life, to help with expanding.
I don't wanna hog the conversation. Anybody else? Any other thoughts? Suggestions, Greg?
I've had a lot of these tours with like representatives and just be prepared for when they ask you, what do you want from me? Like have your speech ready. The first time it kind of caught me off guard. The other 8 times I was like, I want you to support increased funding, after bill funding goes away. This is not part of the issue, this is supporting housing in Canyon City. I want you to remember this story, how this worked with these people, very specifically. So just always be ready with your quick speech that they can remember. I didn't say anything wrong.
So that was, Greg Davis, saying that he agreed that the site visits were key in getting that message and actually showing the shit that we were getting done. It is useful, right? Why not? But the important thing is to know, to have your talking points, to be ready with those talking points, be ready with why this is important, why this makes a difference to this community. It's very true, very good.
Yeah, what do you, the specific question, what do you want? From
And what do you want from that legislature? How can they help? Tyler.
Hey guys, thanks for the facilitating. Tyler City, Missoula. The topic of sustaining funding after bill ends. Is this DEQ ever going to express or consider starting a state revolving loan fund? Much like the state revolving loan fund for water and wastewater. That in essence, if you manage it correctly, the idea is to manage it forever in perpetuity. So that's a great avenue for the state to consider revolving loan funds.
So the question was whether or not the state is ever interested in getting a Brownfields RLF, statewide Brownfields RLF. Is this new? So the idea, we have gone after one. I wrote one we partnered with Department of Commerce. It was my very first EPA competitive grant and wasn't good enough. I can admit that. On many levels. And so we tried to go again, the next cycle, there's every other year. So we went after another one, where we were a week away from applying for it and Department of Commerce had to back out. For whatever reasons. And then we proposed legislation that would specifically allow us in the next session, and that was tabled. So we've tried, and at this point, my focus is promoting you guys as at the local level to get these RLFs because it's just not as tumultuous when we go after it. And what we've done is we've gone after all the 128 supplemental is what we call it, which is the additional funds that we can go after in this bill cycle. We've kind of gone after as much of that as possible to help with cleanups to nonprofits and public entities. And so that's kind of been our emphasis, is focusing on those. And we know that in the RLF world, the grant, everybody comes to you for a grant. It's like, and no one wants to see that loan. And if you guys come to us and say, we can't do this because we need to get the loans out, can you help with this community, help clean up their, the Petroleum County Courthouse, for example, like they just don't have the funds, they can't take a loan. We can spend that money on those. So it's kind of, we're trying to beef up the cleanup grant side of things as much as we can. And hoping that you guys are as successful in getting RLFs as possible.
And follow up, perhaps, I know the nature of EPA money is better. So thank you for trying. Perhaps it's going into the state funded draft legislation that's coming up.
So, yeah, that could be a possibility. The suggestion was maybe fold in this potential statewide, RLF into this potentially proposed Brownfields legislation, so that all options right now are on the table, I believe.
Yeah, there's nothing certain about what we're going to do with this, because literally this was, thing that was hatched between now and how long today. But you're correct about RLF, it's the gift that keeps on giving. And in an era when I think this next session is going to be about OTO funds, which is one-time only funds, I don't think you're going to see a lot of programs that are going to need ongoing appropriations. I just got a sense that's not going to be on the table. So in an era where one-time only appropriations are going to be favored, boy, that isn't very well with a lot of that. Right? You give us that's whatever it is, give us $5 million, and given the nature of the all funds, we're going to have that $5 million somewhere in the next 10 years or 20 years, and like you mentioned, vertically. So I actually like that idea.
Yeah, revolving loan funds, kind of going to this idea that the last session, kind of movement at Department of Commerce, this idea of loan funds administered at a local level that move the dial of the community it has been embraced. It feels less government controlled and more kind of localized controlled. And again, I think right now, if you can be talking to a developer about something that's below market rate, if you can have that below market rate conversation, to Jason's point, they always want free money in the field that we are in. I mean, your first client the first thing out of a client that comes in is, where's the free grant money? I see the guy with the jacket on TV at 2 a.m. There isn't any, but let's talk about something that's below market rate. For a legitimate business, that helps. That blended rate on how to put a deal together is very, very important. So my other component of this is the reason why Central Montana has been, Brownfield Coalition has been big at the market trying to move RLF funds out, because we knew this may slow down at some point. So we pushed hard to get more money, pushed hard to get grant money out, but we wanted that below market rate return on investment RLF, because there might be a day that we might not have this, the EPA being able to help us charge this. So, I mean, as an organization, we've been pushing hard to get to this point. It's part of our risk assessments and how we manage our community is getting that money on the ground. The RLF is a great way to do it.
Yeah, other thoughts, ideas? With that said,
lunch.
I want to give my sincere appreciation to both for Paul for making, I mean, he's coming down and heading right back up. So I really do appreciate the time that you devoted to the Brownfields, not just this session, but with your time at Verify. You've been a tremendous advocate for Brownfields. And I appreciate that. I appreciate Anita's involvement as well. Both Brian and Paul have been the president of Anita in the past. And that's why we at DEQ Brownfields see Anita as a critical partner in the success of this Brownfields program. So I really do appreciate your time. And if anybody, we can use this forum as a start. If anybody wants to have a seat at the table, with this legislation, please, we will help direct any way we can. But yeah, just thank you. I don't even know what to say.